The room smelled of wine gone sour and the balm the maesters favored for deep rents of flesh, a waxy, herbal stink that clung to the curtains and heavy tapestries and even the bedposts carved with stags. A storm pressed its damp palm against the windows of the Red Keep, and the sea beat the cliffs below like some great heart beating under stone. Robert Baratheon sat half upright against pillows that had learned the weight of him these past weeks. His thick fingers worried at the frayed edge of the sheet while the last of the pain worked its way out of him. Scars made their own weathers. He had learned that over years of fighting and feasting and forgetting. Wounded places ached before rain. Old breaks sang in a thin voice just before thunder. Maester Pycelle had been the one to say aloud what all the whisperers were already saying, that the king's belly had been sewn like a rent sausage and would hold if he would only stay still a fortnight more. As if he were a boy in a tower told by a septa to remain abed with a cough, and not a man whose very name had once sent lords to their knees. Robert had laughed then, a short sound that tasted of iron in his mouth. The boar had not killed him. He sometimes thought the animal had been surprised, those small eyes like wet obsidian widening a heartbeat before the hammer came down. He still smelled the boar when he closed his eyes, the musk and churned mud and wildness of it. He still saw the flash of white tusk, felt the pull and give of his own flesh. He still heard his foolish laugh, and the way the boys had gone pale, and how the wine had burned his throat all that day and night as if he had swallowed the fire that had gone out of him years ago. The chamber door opened, and Eddard Stark came in without flourish and with barely a sound, as if the stone itself had stepped forward into the light. Winter clung to the man even here, in the scarlet half-light of King's Landing. He bowed his head, not so deeply as a courtier, just enough to mark habit and regard, and the old camaraderie that no court could dress nor undress. "You should be Abed," Ned said. He had a way, Robert had teased it out of him back in the Eyrie in their brawling youth, of sounding like one of those river stones. Smooth, cool, unyielding. "The maester! Pycelle would pickle me if he could," Robert rumbled. "Pour me in a jar of his reeking oils and set me on a shelf. I'd be safe there, and every rat in the keep would bow to me for fear I'd fall on them." Ned's mouth twitched, which for him was like a lesser man doubling over with laughter. He came closer to the bed and stood with his hands folded, the way he did when he waited for a storm to pass rather than try to argue it away. It was an old stance, familiar as the scar on Robert's left knee. "There is word," Ned said, after the silence had carried them for a little while. "From the south. Renly has raised his banners in the Reach. Highgarden rides with him. He means to stand before storm's end with a host bright as summer." Robert's fingers tightened in the sheet, and the linen tore without his noticing. A twitch, that was all. The name was a spear wrapped in silk. He had always thought of Renly as a page that had never needed turning, a boy trapped just before the line breaks, a green velvet voice and laughter like polished bronze ringing against stone. The boy had been good at making other men laugh too, without ever seeming cruel about it. He had been good with faces and names and the small gifts that made great lords feel as if they had discovered something about themselves when they were only discovering Renly. Good at being a court. Now he wanted a crown. "Renly?" Robert said, the rumble thinning as it moved between his teeth. "He wants to play at war." "He will not call it play," Ned said. "Nor will Stannis." Stannis. The name came heavier because there was iron in it and the smell of salt. If Renly was spring grass, Stannis was a stone set in that grass by some ancient sea. Robert could see him now as he had been a boy, all elbows and hunger and those eyes that saw rules laid down where other men saw nothing. Stannis had always looked like a man at the end of a siege even when he was fed and warm. He had held Storm's End for Robert in the deeps of winter and famine, and Robert had given that castle to Renly afterward, and sometimes, when the night wind spoke through the shutters, Robert heard Stannis' silence about that. No man could be master of two silences forever. "There is more," Ned said, and the words fell heavy, as if his mouth had weighed them. "Stannis sailed from Dragonstone. He has priests with him, red priests. He speaks of his right in words I do not like." Robert cracked a grin that did not reach his eyes. Stannis speaks of his right if he's asked the price of lamp oil. He'll speak of his right if you ask him to pass the salt. He speaks of you, Ned said, and Robert saw how his friend's mouth had thinned. Not in judgment, but in sorrow that had been weathered and set aside at the gate like an old shield. He says the realm has rotted under the Lannisters, and your hand has been turned away. Robert looked at the ceiling. A spider had made a clever web over one of the carved antlers that jutted there like pale fingers. If he lay long enough, he could count the way the silk trembled when a gull screamed down by the sea. He said. He would say that. He's not wrong. But the man's not been wrong before, and being right never made him loved. They will meet before storms end, Ned said. Renly from the green road, Stannis from the sea. The lords south and west will take their measure. If they take their measure without you there. Robert's laugh was a scrape. He felt the ache beneath his ribs like the voice of an old dog's growl you no longer feared but could never quite ignore. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, and the sheet slid from his thighs. The scar on his belly pulled. The skin tugged where the needle had kissed it. He dropped his hand there and pressed until the ache sharpened and steadied. When he stood, the room tilted like a ship but then held. He did not sway where Ned could see it. You said I should be Abed, Robert said. Then I should be on a horse by noon. Ned did not say no. He stood and took in every inch of Robert as if measuring what he could carry. If you ride, you do not ride with a host. The Lannisters. Bugger the Lannisters. The old heat flared in his chest, and the pain liked the heat. It rode along it like a crow on a warm wind. Cersei can chase me with her father's wolves or her father's gold. She won't catch me if I ride with only the men I trust and the ones too old to be fooled into trusting me. You mean to stand between Stannis and Renly alone? Ned said, not disbelieving, only setting the words where both of them could see them. I mean to remind my brothers they have an older brother, Robert said. He smiled then, and it was an honest thing for a moment, a crack in a wall that let in the sun. And I mean to smell storms end again. I have not smelt it since I gave it away, and I think Stannis has been smelling it for me this whole time. Barristan came when they sent for him, as clean as a cup lifted from cool water, in plain steel and a white cloak that had been brushed and brushed until it could take no more cleanliness. A knight's whiteness, Robert had decided long ago, was not like fresh snow but like old bone. Barristan bowed and scowled almost at once, which he disguised poorly under duty. You are not mended, he said. I am mended enough, Robert answered. And if I am not, you will mend what you can as we ride. Bring me a handful of men. Men who remember the smell of a true camp and do not flinch at rain. We ride south. Your Grace, Barristan began, and then Ned's eyes caught his and something passed between the Northman and the White Knight like a nod given over a river. As you command. The gear had been kept ready, for there had always been this chance. The Red Keep had its secrets, and one of them was that it could swallow and release men like a cave swallows and releases bats at dusk. They brought Robert a maester's salve and wrapped his belly in a fresh band. They laced him into leathers that had always seemed a shade too tight because his body had never wanted to be contained. He walked out into a morning that had not noticed him in weeks, and the sky was a pewter bowl overturned, the light thin and precise, picking out the weaknesses in faces and stone alike. The smell of wet dust lifted with the hooves. Cersei stood in the yard, not dressed to ride, and that told Robert as much as the look on her face. She wore green like an insult, heavy velvet, throat white as milk above. She was beautiful as a pale knife. The men drew back as if her sleeves might have spattered their boots if they brushed against them. You are mad, she said, as if it had just occurred to her and she was honoring the discovery by saying it. You bleed from lifting a cup and mean to sit a saddle. Queen, Robert said, and did not stop. He recognized the game and was too tired to switch boards. When he made to pass, she set her hand on the pommel of his saddle. The movement was so fast that if it had been a dagger, he might have been cut. If you die on a road like a common outlaw, I will see to the boy, she said low. Not the words themselves, but the way she said boy, as if the word were something she had crafted with care and put up on a high shelf. Robert looked down at her hand, the slender wrist, the rings that had always looked to him like little prisons for small, gleaming things. Her hand was steady. He remembered when it had seemed like something he might want, a hand to lift and kiss, a sign of his victory. He remembered it the way one remembered the taste of a fruit eaten too green, the mouth's regret stored in the teeth. "I will see to my brothers," he said. "I will see to my realm. See to your boy." He slowed, then, because somewhere inside, the old promise stirred. Ned's words, Lyanna's ghost, and something he had not wanted to touch since that night he had nearly died. The boy, his boy. Joffrey had his mother's face and none of his father's storms. Sometimes Robert had looked at him and seen a room he could not enter. He nudged the horse, and Barristan took the head of the party, and they passed out through the King's Gate into a city that glowed with slick stone and smoke lifted by the rain. Black gulls gathered on the seawalls, and the stalls in the fish market had piled their catches high like offerings to a damp god. There had been a time when the traders would have shouted the king's name as he rode by, and that time was not gone, but it was farther away now, the shout thinned by years and gold and fear and plenty of the wrong kind. He had never liked the smells of this place. The piss and rose water and hot iron staggered together, but the rain washed it a little, enough that the road south tasted of promise. They rode 4 days on the King's Road, and Robert took each day like a man gnaws a bone that might still hold marrow. His side burned when they made camp. He drank less than he had ever allowed himself on a march. He allowed the maester who rode with them, one of the younger ones, not Pycelle with his size, to look at the wound every night. He ate soups which he mocked openly, but ate. He rode looking ahead mostly, and sometimes, when Ned fell in step with him, he spoke of old things, but they never spoke their names. He spoke of brawls in the Eyrie with boys whose names he had once shouted down a hall and not thought of in years. He spoke of storms that had torn tiles from the roofs of monastic houses along the narrow sea. He spoke of a time he had woken with a girl in his arms and not known her name or why they had been laughing. He did not speak of Lyanna. He did not speak of Stefan and Cassana, who had been there once like a hearth and then were not. He did not speak of the boar. He carried those with him like small stones in a pocket, heavy because they knocked together when he moved. On the 4th day, the land began to smell sweet with things he remembered from childhood more than from kingship. The soil had a darker taste here, richer, and the hedges were thick and glossy with rain. They passed farms where the drovers raised 2 fingers in a polite half-salute, eyes round at the sight of a king with so few men and so much purpose. They passed a waystone where some lordling had carved a stag into the face of old rock, and the moss had grown up around the antlers as if crowning the animal with green. Robert reached out and laid his palm on the cold relief as they paused to water the horses, and for a heartbeat he was a boy with bark scraping his palms, ignoring Stannis's voice calling from the path and Renly's smaller voice piping nonsense just to be in the sound of the others. They made storms end by evening of the 6th day. The castle rose from the land and the sea as if someone had pushed a black fist up through the earth's skin. There were clouds enough to bury a fleet, and the sea beyond was the color of old iron. And Storm's End had not grown any smaller because Robert had seen it last as a lord and not as a king. Rain came in sheets, and the wind flung it, and the fortress did not bend. Renly's camp lay south and west, spilling banners over the meadow like a garden torn up and planted again in cloth. Bright tents gleamed among cookfires. Men-at-arms in colors that had never seen battle paraded horses that stamped with clean shoes. There were singers there, because even in the rain Robert caught the faint line of a lute plucked too carefully for weather. And there were Tyrells aplenty. The golden rose snapped and snared along the lines of stakes, on standards and cloaks and reins. It looked like triumph taught to dance. Stannis's host kept the hard ground by the sea road, near a bluff where the wind wrote its name on men who dared it. Banners there were darker and fewer, and the men with them spoke to each other as if words were coins and had to be counted twice before spent. The fiery heart of the Red God moved in the wind beside the crowned stag, and each time the cloth slapped back Robert felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. He knew that heart now. He had heard enough whispers to know there was a woman who moved like a torch among Stannis's captains, a woman with hair the color of a new wound and eyes that had made hard men hesitate. He did not like the thought of her. He did not like the thought of Stannis lit by another god's lamp. Barristan gave orders with soft words, and halfway between the two camps, on a rise where old storms had cut the grass short and even, they set a pavilion with no colors of its own. Robert stood at the mouth and looked at the castle, which had saved him once by starving his brother almost to bones. He thought of Davos Seaworth, who had run ships through breakers with his belly pressed to planks and had risen from smuggler to knight for it. He had meant to speak to Davos one day without other ears, to say a thing he had never said about the nature of bread and hunger and thanks. He had not done it. He had given Storm's End to Renly afterward and told himself it was a kindness all around, a bomb and a bomb-maker's shop. He stood there in the rain with it running down his neck and thought of all the bombs that were just perfumed tallow. A standard-bearer had been sent to each camp with the king's seal and words. He did not wait long. Stannis came first because he always had come first when it was duty, even if duty had already cut his hands and would cut them again. He came on a great-boned horse whose coat might have been black if the rain had allowed anything to be black. He wore plain plate with a surcoat that bore the crowned stag burning red upon black, and over that they had set a small brooch in the shape of a seven-pointed star that he never seemed to remember he had, or perhaps he remembered it too well. He dismounted like a man stepping from a ship and walked as if he would not allow the ground to betray him. With him came men who wore futures on their faces. One had a scrubbed honesty like new canvas stretched over old wood. Another, thin and suspicion-sour, looked as if he had eaten nothing but vinegar. Davos walked a pace behind, his cloak soaked and clinging to him like seaweed, and he looked at Robert with that clear gaze that had no fear and less adornment, and on his hands the shortened fingers showed white at the tips when he tightened them. "Brother," Stannis said, and no man alive could make that single word a complaint and a promise and a judgment all in one go except him. "Brother," Robert answered, and he stepped forward and caught Stannis by the shoulders before the man could decide to offer him a forearm or a nod or a prayer. He felt bone and long muscle, the way Stannis had always been put together like something used to bash doors and carry stones. After a moment too long, Stannis lifted his own hands and set them against Robert's arms, and Robert caught a breath he had not known he held. "Your belly," Stannis said. "You ride like a fool." "I ride like a king," Robert said, and some warmth came of saying it to this one, a warmth that was not vanity. "And it seems my kingship is needed. I never thought to say so between you and Renly." Stannis's mouth pressed a line. His eyelids lowered and lifted. "I did not think to need you for this either," he said, admirably refusing everything else without pretending it did not exist. The Red Woman stood at Stannis's left shoulder like a flame that had learned to keep its shape inside rain. Her hair clung to her temples like copper wire. Her lips were the color of ripe cherries in a garden unknown to this shore. She looked at Robert as if measuring a length of wood to see if it would make a beam. Robert let her measure. He lifted his chin the way he would have in a tilt. "We are honored by your presence, your grace," she said. Her voice was smoke curled through a keyhole. "The Lord of Light smiles to see brothers united in purpose." Robert laughed in a short, ugly way. "I once knew a red cat in the Stormlands," he said. "It smiled when it was hungry, and when it wasn't, it went looking for a boy to scratch." A flicker crossed her eyes. She inclined her head. "All hunger is holy when it leads us to fire," she said. "And you, great lord, have lived cold and shadowed too long." "Your grace," Davos said, stepping forward so that Robert could look at someone whose feet seemed to touch the same ground his own did. "I am glad to see you well enough to be riding. I speak out of turn often. Forgive me if I do so now. I'd say there's rain enough without setting more fires in it." Robert's mouth moved without his permission. "Ser Onion," he said gently, which surprised him. He had not meant to be gentle with anyone this day. "You speak sense as you always did. Are you in the habit now of speaking it to Stannis? How much of it does he hear?" Davos's face warmed, weather-worn and honest. "As much as any man hears from a lowly knight," he said. "Some days the sea carries words easy. Some days she throws them back in your face with foam. Stannis's eyes snapped. "Enough," he said, and Davos quieted and bowed his head a fraction, and the Red Woman's smile became a lesson written in neat letters. Robert looked at them both and thought of rope pulled tight but not yet frayed. Renly came with music, insofar as a man could bring it with him. The rain filled the pauses. He rode with Lord Tyrell on his right and Ser Loras a pace behind in green armor that did not seem to comprehend the weather. Fully, bright cloaks streamed. Men laughed a little too loud and then tried to make it sound easy. Renly himself wore his crown. Antlers of dark wood bound with gold, delicate as branches and heavier than he let it look. He was handsome the way younger brothers can be, as if the gods had learned some tricks between castings, and he smiled as he dismounted because smiling was what he did, and doing it here became something more bitter for its brightness. "Brother," Renly said, and when he embraced Robert he smelled of apples under the rain, and some expensive oil a reach woman had pressed for its perfume. "You look like a man who has fought a boar and cheated him at dice." Robert snorted and clapped him on the back hard enough to make the crown knock against Renly's ear. "You look like a man who has stolen half a garden to sew up as banners and the other half to press into pies." "Pies are a better use for lemons than for faces," Renly said, and his eyes slid past Robert and found Stannis, and the smile lessened like a candle trimmed. "We are well met." "We are," Stannis said, and his tone made the words a weight. "We will be better met if you take that ridiculous crown off your head." Renly's eyes sharpened in a way only Robert and perhaps Ned would have seen. "The crown sits well on my hair," he said lightly. "It never suited you, Stannis. It buried you when you tried it on as a boy." "I didn't try on your crown," Stannis snapped. "I wore your duties. While you were a child playing at tours you didn't attend, I fed men stones to keep them alive long enough to starve another day for your brother. I broke law to keep law. I held." Robert put up a hand. Rain crawled down his sleeve and into his palm. "Enough," he said, and that old sound came back. Men quieting because he had spoken, not because the words were pretty or sharp, but because they were his and they landed. "We will not count old pains like pennies here. I know them better than either of you. I minted most of them." Something in Stannis's jaw eased by a grain. Renly's eyes flicked up through water and found the castle and then came back, and there was a moment, just a moment, where all three of them stood under the weather like men born under the same roof. It was not forgiveness. It was the truth of a thing set down between them. Inside the pavilion, the rain sounded like men marching past a door. Barristan stood to one side and studied the seams of the tent as if they might betray him. Lord Tyrell settled with his rose ring glimmering, hands folded like church candles, his eyes smiling and calculating both. Ser Loras stood like a spear. The Red Woman stood like an answer looking for a question. Davos stood like a man on a quay with a boat he trusted, watching the ripples. Robert did not sit. He did not like to sit for words that mattered. He planted his fists on the table where men had laid out a map of this ground, the castle drawn as a square of black ink that could not hold its own bulk. Renly had already cut an apple and set the slices on a silver dish, as if that were the first thing to do wherever he went. Stannis had refused the apple before it was offered. "You are both fools," Robert said, without more ceremony. "You are fools with armies and fools with names, and fools who share a father and mother and everything that should have made you not fools. There will be songs about this if we permit it, but the songs will not care whom they praise so long as they can find a chorus to carry. I, however, care." Renly's mouth tilted. "If you are to call us fools, I would prefer you did it with a cup in your hand. A man's foolishness is softer under wine." "I prefer to feel the edges of my words today," Robert said. "I have ridden under them this whole damned way. You will listen to them, then you will speak your own, and then—" He looked at them both, and though his side ached with the breath, he took it and let it out slow, because kingship sometimes was no more than the timing of a breath. "Then we will make something of this that won't shame our father." Stannis looked at the table because looking at faces always hurt him more. Renly looked at Robert because he could not bear to look anywhere else when words came hard. Ned did not move. Barristan's knuckles were quiet on his sword hilt. "Stannis first," Robert said. "You have always put your claims in neat lines. Put this one so that even a man who has drunk too much could follow it." Stannis's eyes lifted, and for once there was something like relief in them. "The law is clear," he said, and it was like the first drop of rain before a squall. Inevitable, recognizable, perhaps even welcome if you were a farmer. When a king dies, his eldest brother inherits if the king's issue are false or unfit. Your issue are, he paused. He had never balked at the knife before. Robert watched him balk now as if something in this tent made the blade heavier. He swallowed. There are doubts, strong ones, enough to call into question their claim. The realm is not a toy. It is not a garden to trim. It is a fortress to keep. I am elder to Renly. The line runs through me. I have kept your law when it cost me, and I will keep it when it costs more. There is a rot in the capital. There is your queen's father's hand in every purse and your queen's brother's seed in places it should not be. Cut the rot. Name me heir. Command Renly to bend the knee, and I will make war on any man who says otherwise, but not on my brother if you forbid it." Robert let the words rest. Stannis's voice was a blade laid carefully on wood and left there. He turned his head and found Ned's gaze a steady counsel at the edge of his vision. It would be simple if it were only this: the law, the elder claim, the neatness. The Red Woman's presence was a stain on the neatness. Renly's crown was a stain of a different kind. The Lannisters were not a stain. They were a web. "Renly," Robert said. Renly picked up a slice of apple and put it down again without tasting. He smiled, but it slipped. He set both hands on the map as Robert had done and, for a heartbeat, looked like a boy imitating his father before a pier glass. Then he was himself again, a man whose charm had hardened into something like a blade you never saw until you felt its pinch. "I love you, Robert," he said simply, which made the words heavier than when anyone else said them. "You have always been a storm and a feast and a fellowship. You were better as a lord than as a king, and all the realm knows it, and they love you anyway because they remember the boy and the hammer, and because your laughter made them forgive many things. But we do not live on laughter, and the realm does not live on the memory of a battle by a river. I am loved. I say this not to be vain but to be honest. I have the reach, and they will bring me the Stormlands, and I can have the Riverlands if I smile at them the right way and promise justice done with a light hand. I can unite men who do not like to be told the law and men who like it too much. Stannis would be a good brother to a king. He would tell you when your boot was ill-made and your road ill-laid, and he would be right. But he gathers men he does not understand, and a god who is foreign to us, and a priestess who looks at us as if we are wood to be burned. I would be a better king, not because of law, but because of people. And because I am not afraid to set aside something that hurts the realm, even if that thing is your marriage." There was a soft, choked noise from the Tyrell retainers behind him. A laugh or a cough or an admiration. Loras's face had gone very still and bright, the way a boy's face will when he is thinking something brave and stupid at once. Stannis's mouth was a wound. "You speak of love as if it were a tithe," Stannis said. "Pay what you owe, and we shall let you pass." "It is no tithe," Renly said. "It is what makes men follow us and not just march behind us. I have it. I did not beg it. I did not steal it from a god. I have it because I can look at a farmer's boy and remember his name and ask after his mother's cough, and because I can dance Stannis. It is a small thing, but it is not nothing." "You will not dance the castle walls into falling," Stannis said. "You will not charm a winter into spring. The law stands. The seven stand. You would make men your god because you cannot convince a god to be your man." Renly laughed gently. "Listen to yourself," he said. "You have taken up a new god because the old ones would not answer your prayers, and still you think me an apostate." The Red Woman's voice coiled, slid between their words. "The Lord of Light is not new," she said. "He is the only. All other lamps are shadows. The king," she nodded at Stannis with a humility that had been carved with care, like a saint's expression in a September, "was born to wake the Dragonstone, to bring light out of the sea. He is Azor Ahai come again." Robert had not meant to bark a laugh so loudly. It was like the sound had been waiting on his tongue and leaped when the door opened. Azor, I have heard 100 names for the prince who will save us, and I have believed each one long enough to laugh at the next. Stannis is my brother. He is no prince. He is a rock. He will break a ship and keep a house. If the world ends tomorrow, I'll be happy of him, if he's got a wall to hold, but I will never hear him sing a song. Songs are for little lords, Stannis said, and there was the crack in him, the old bruise pressed. They give you apples and call it wisdom. They lie prettier. The rain thickened so that for a few minutes all of them simply listened, the sound a curtain drawn down around the tent and trimmed with thunder. Robert looked at the apple slices and took one, tasted of summer and of anger. He chewed slowly. He thought of the red woman's eyes and of Loras's clean armor and of Davos's shortened fingers and of Ned's silence. He thought of his gut aching and of the boar's hot breath, and of another hot breath years ago when a girl who would never be his had whispered a promise and then been taken away by a promise she had not made. He thought of the boy in the red keep who bore his name and not his blood. He tasted the sourness at the heart of sweetness and swallowed anyway. I will not name either of you king while I breathe, Robert said, and the tent shifted as if men had leaned in without meaning to. Renly, take that crown off your head. If you wish for one, you can steal it from some trinket seller in the city and wear it to bed. Stannis, put down that damned banner with its foreign god beside our stag, or I'll give you a priest like I gave you turnips when we starved at the castle. Enough to keep you alive and too much to swallow. I am not dead. While I live, the throne is not a toy given to brothers to keep them quiet. You will both stay your hands. Stannis's jaw bunched, and an old storm gathered in him. And when you die, he said, the words as sharp as anything he'd ever spoken, will you leave us to the Lannisters? To that boy with his mother's eyes? Will you say nothing of your heir? Will you say nothing of the law? Will you die as you lived? Laughing when you should be looking. The tent seemed smaller. The rain quieted enough that the breath in Robert's chest sounded loud to him. He looked at Ned then, fully, and there was the truth scrolled across the Northman's face like runes in ice. He would help Robert say what needed saying. He had brought the truth to him once like a sword wrapped in linen. Robert had not drawn it then. He gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened and felt the seam of his wound complain. I will not leave the realm to lions, he said, nor will I leave it to beggars dressed in banners. I will speak what is true when I have pulled the arrow's head cleanly from the flesh. He looked at Stannis, the man's eyes always hungry in a dry hunger that chafed, and yet so steady. Those eyes broke him and made him proud in the same heartbeat. You have right, more right than Renly. If I die, the throne falls to you in law. But I am not dead, and you will not make a king while I live. Renly. He turned to his youngest brother and found the old easy charm bending for once. Put down your crown. Bend the knee to me openly before your army. Follow me to King's Landing. We will pull down the spider webs. We will send your Tyrell friends back to their gardens with their dignity intact. We will cut away what must be cut. I will name my heir when we have done it, and not before. You both have my word. If that is worth less than an apple since I took the crown, tell me so now and save me the trip back. Renly looked at the apple slices and then at Loras as if the boy were a glass that could reflect to him the right expression. He lifted a hand, and something like sorrow passed over his mouth and was gone. I will bend the knee to you if it saves the realm and saves men I have come to like from bleeding in ditches. But I will not bend my neck to Stannis's rope. I will not wear his law like a hair shirt and call it love. If I give you my army, you will use it to name him heir, and then he will make war on Highgarden before the smell of your pyre has left the city. Stannis's voice came from a deep place. You think I would waste men for a garden's pride? I do not care for roses. I care for walls and grain and the Iron Bank. I care for names written straight on parchment. I would keep the Reach as I kept Storm's End, by not letting it fall. By starving it, you mean, Renly murmured. By counting each turnip as if it were your own blood. I count because I have bled, Stannis snapped. You count smiles. Robert's head hurt. He wished suddenly, childishly, for a peach to eat in the rain on a summer day with no one speaking. He had eaten too much of everything that was not that. You will not argue like washerwomen while I stand here, he said, letting the old thunder into his voice, and it felt good. It felt like drawing a sword his body still remembered, even if the world had convinced him he'd traded it for a scepter long ago. Renly, will you march with me to King's Landing, or will you not? Stannis, will you keep your hand from striking at your brother if he comes in peace? Renly looked down, then up, and took his crown off at last. He held it in his hands, weighing it like fruit. I will march with you, he said low. If I find your justice wanting, I will march away again. I will not ask leave. And if you name that man heir without reckoning with the realm's heart, I will set this crown on my head once more in a place of my choosing. Stannis's eyes closed for a moment. To Robert, it looked like a prayer a boy made late at night to no one in particular. If Renly comes not at me, I will not strike him, he said. If he keeps to the law, I will keep to it. If he breaks it in a way that tears the realm, I will close the tear. That is all I know to say. It was not enough, and it was more than Robert had hoped for. He let his hands lift from the map. His side ached like an old friend pulling on his sleeve. He felt the weight of the air change, a storm like a thought moving further out to sea. We make camp here tonight, he said. Between you, no banners but mine. We will eat as men have eaten together before. In the morning, we will ride to the castle, and I will stand beneath its walls and remember what hunger taught me. Then we will turn our faces north. There are letters to write and heads to knock. He did not look at the Red Woman again. He would not give her his attention as a coin. She needed attention the way a fire needed oil. He did not know what she could do, but he could guess what men would do for her. Renly's camp sent meats and sweet wine, and his cooks fussed over sauces that steam could not keep from weakening in this weather. Stannis's camp sent dark loaves that tasted of molasses and brine, and little smoked fish that yielded to the tooth with a satisfying salt. Robert ate both. He sat under the pavilion and listened to men talk around him in low voices and let the noise of them soak him the way the rain had done earlier. Barristan told a quiet story about a tourney in which he had unhorsed a man who had beaten him badly the year before. He told it not as a boast, but as an explanation of how a thing can be learned if you spend enough time making your body remember. Ned said little, and when he did speak, it was to ask Davos questions about the sea in winter. Stannis sat with his bread and ate like a man who had never learned to enjoy eating because he had learned too much about going without. Renly watched, and sometimes Robert saw the boy in him laugh at a joke a Tyrell lad whispered, and then see something on Stannis's face and swallow the laughter as if it had been too much salt in a fine dish. When the light thinned to that place where all the greens and blues of the world seemed to remember each other, and the rain fell light as silk, Robert dismissed the men with a word and sat with Ned and Barristan. He leaned back, the cushions sighing under him like tired old dogs. He will not keep from striking forever, Ned said. He did not say which brother he meant. Nor will Renly keep his crown set aside as if it were a hat to be doffed for a septa. You have bought us a night. Sometimes a night is all a man needs to sleep off the worst of his folly, Robert said. He pressed a hand to his belly. Sometimes it is all a man has. Barristan's eyes found his hand, then looked away. You should let the maester look. After, Robert said. No man takes my bandages in front of my brothers. Not tonight. They sat in the rain-curtained quiet and listened to storm's end. The castle made its own sounds. The wind ran along its battlements like a cat that knew every stone. The sea struck the cliff it was rooted in, and the sound was not thunder but something older, as if the earth remembered being soft for a time and then set again to hardness. The smell of the rain here was different from the rain in the city. It had no refuse in it. It had salt and wet stone and the faint sweetness of bruised grass. Much later, when the men in both camps had sought their tents, when the last of Renly's minstrels had given up trying to keep his lute dry and had surrendered his cords to the weather, when the sentries had warmed their hands 3 times over new and old fires, Robert dismissed Ned with a nod he felt in his bones. Ned had that look of a man who could not rest but would behave himself anyway. Barristan stayed because he had no other way of living than by staying when the king stayed and moving when the king moved. Robert lay down, and the pain flared and then subsided as he found a place for his body among the cushions. Sleep came in little ships that moved along his blood, and he boarded them, and every time he stepped on one it turned into a plank on a dark sea. He dreamed of the siege and woke with Davos at the flap of the tent. The smuggler, Night Now, and perhaps the same thing, held his cloak around him like a secret. Barristan had a hand on his sword, and then he did not, because he saw Davos's face and something on his own softened as if a bird had settled there. "Forgive the hour," Davos said. "There is something. The woman is walking the lines. She does not disturb men when they see her. They forget her. But I watched for her without watching, the way you watch a tide, and I saw the empty space where she had been." Robert pushed himself upright, every stitch in his belly catching like a harp string. He slid his feet to the rug. The rain had quieted and the wind had risen, and the sea sounded nearer. "Is she a witch?" he asked, hearing the boy in his own voice and hating it and accepting it. "Say it how you will. I have no stomach for priests." Davos came in farther, and the candle made his face look like a map where roads had been drawn over a coast. "She is something," he said. "Stannis believes it is holiness. I do not know enough to disagree with a king, but I know enough to fear. Your Grace, if I overstep, forgive me. Keep your guards tight. Do not let the shadows in." Barristan made a small sound through his nose. "Shadows," he said. "I have faced men who dressed themselves in better names. I will watch." "Watch the walls," Davos said. "Not the men." The words hung there, odd-shaped but not foolish, and Robert felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. He glanced toward the tent flap. The night just beyond was the color of dried blood. Fires burned in the near distance, little stars pinned to the earth. He could almost see the place where Stannis's men held their line, and farther, where Renly's men dreamt of full bellies and golden promises. The castle loomed a presence rather than a shape. "Sit," Robert said to Davos, and the knight shook his head like a dog who had been asked to join the table. "I am not easy," Davos said. "In all the years I ran honest smuggling, I never liked a harbor at night when the wind had just shifted. This feels like that." Robert grunted and took up a cup, and the wine smelled like the Reach, which was to say it smelled like fruit that had spent money. He put the cup down again without drinking. He had wanted to, out of habit. He did not, out of stubbornness. "I will walk," he said, and Barristan opened his mouth and then closed it and nodded as if this had always been the answer. "I will stand where the wind can touch me. If there are shadows to watch, I would see them try." He took his cloak and set it over his shoulders himself, because sometimes a man needed to put his own shape in the night. The three of them stepped out. The wind had a clean knife in it. It moved the canvas of the tent in little breaths. From the dark, horses snorted and went back to their heavy dreams. Somewhere a man coughed and apologized to the air as if it were a lady he had startled. They walked to the rise where the pavilion sat, a darker dark against dark. The grass shivered. Robert stood and looked down at Stannis's camp first, then Renly's, then at the castle again. He thought of his brothers as boys. There was a night he always remembered. A night when a storm had hammered Storm's End so hard the shutters had banged, and the nurse had run from bed to bed to keep the boys from waking. Robert had been half-grown, already broad in shoulder, already hungry for something he could not name. Stannis had been all angles and late limbs. Renly had been a round, thoughtfully shaped loaf of a boy. Robert had left his bed and gone to the window, ignoring the nurse's hiss. Stannis had risen to join him because Stannis had always risen when something had to be done, even if that thing was only looking out a window in a storm. Renly had slept on. They had stood and watched the rain run down the pane and counted the time between the lightning and the thunder. That had been their measure then. The storm told time and they obeyed it. Now the night carried a taste like iron ground down with salt. Robert felt the hair at the nape of his neck notice something before he did. Barristan shifted beside him. Not a step but a breath with muscles in it. Davos strained his eyes, and then lowered them to the nearer ground like a sailor checking his feet for sound footing. "She moves like a dream when it wants to become a story," Davos said under his breath. "Not walking, not quite." Robert followed his gaze. At first there was nothing but wind and rain and stray light, and then there was less than nothing. A place where the light from a fire should have touched the grass and it did not. A place where the rain should have made a trembling on the air and it made a smoothness instead. It was as if someone had cut a shape from the night and set it moving. He swallowed. He felt the old weight of his hammer in his palm. A ghost that would always be with him even when he held only goblets and quills. "Barris Tan," he said very softly. "I see it." The old knight's voice had lines in it you could read by. "Between the cook fires, there and then not. Closer now. It is thinner than cobweb." Robert's body, stubborn animal that it was, took a step forward. Something in the wound in his belly pulled him back. A hand made of old pain. And he obeyed that hand because for once it had more sense than his heart. He stood his ground and let the thing come if it would. If it were a trick, it was a fine one. If it were holy, he would spit when it passed him and make the sign of an old god just to see if it flinched. Davos's hand closed and opened. "She went to Renly," he said. "She goes to Renly in bad dreams. I think she has sent things after him. Forgive me. I am saying what I think, which is often as bad as saying what I know." The knight's voice slipped toward old cadence when fear peeled it. Robert looked toward the Reachman's camp. The bright colors had gone to ghosts now. Even greens and golds looked like gray when the night got deep. He could not see movement. He felt it, though, a pressure where men slept. He had always been able to feel men like that, the press of them. The first time had been on the Trident, when every man's breath had pulled the river into his chest and then pushed it out again. He had swung his hammer and that breath had stopped for some forever and for others only to be taken up again in a different key. The shadow slid. It did not look like a man. It did not look like anything except the absence of what should have been there. When it passed near a flame, the flame bent away as if a wind had put its lips against it. Barris Tan drew his blade very slow, and the sound of it was a clean line. Davos murmured something that might have been a prayer and might have been a sailor's old nonsense to charm the tide. Robert felt anger then, fresh and young, the kind he had thought he'd squandered on women and meat and posturing. Someone had sent this not thing into his camps, near his brothers. Someone had thought to make war with shadows while he breathed the same air as them. He lifted his voice. It was not the bellow of the battlefield. It was the voice he had used at 16 when a man twice his size had tried to throw him out of his own hall after too much ale. It made itself heard under the wind and above it both. "Come then," he said. "If you come, come to me. Leave my brothers to their own sins." The knight felt it. He could not say how he knew. The shape in the darkness hesitated, or perhaps the wind did, and the fire nearest them swayed toward them like a listener. Robert took another step, this time ignoring the tug at his stitches. Barris Tan moved with him, the sword bare now and thirsty. Davos shifted too, the way a man will move to place his body where it might block a thing from reaching a ship's mast. The shadow drew close enough that he felt its cold. He had been cold before, naked in rain at 16, laughing with boys by a river they would later fight in. Cold on a winter march with bread frozen and cooked in ashes until it tasted like good despair. This was not that cold. It was a hollowness. It reminded him, briefly and irrationally, of a room with all its furniture taken out, when you step in and the sound of your own boot is too loud. Barris Tan struck. The blade went through the place where a man's neck would be, if the shadow had had a neck, and there was no resistance, only a hiss like a log taking a coal. Davos flung something that flashed white. The stub of a candle? A bit of chalk? And the thing seemed to recoil the way a fish will when a splash touches its edge. Robert did not move with sword or torch. He set both feet and spread his arms as if to embrace an old friend, and he bellowed into the wind. "I am Robert of the Storm. If you come for a king's blood, taste mine while it is still hot." The shadow trembled. He felt it all along his skin. It moved the air at his wrists, at his throat, and for a heartbeat his wound sang as if strings had been plucked. He did not flinch. He stood, and his body remembered the exact angle of standing that had made other men break because they had expected him to move. The wind shoved, and the fire bent away, and the shadow slid along his cloak like a memory of a hand. He felt a drop of rain run into the corner of his mouth, and it tasted of iron, and that was real, and he seized it like a man grabs a rope after a wave takes his footing. The shadow passed. It did not go through him. It did not seize him. It moved along him as if testing a door and finding it barred with something it could not see. It turned, and Robert felt the turn the way a hound feels a hare's change of mind. It ran toward the bright camp. Renly? Davos breathed, and the word had in it a boy's plea for his brother to wait. Barristan was already moving. The old knight ran with his blade low and his head forward, and the rain made a crown on his white hair. Robert followed, not as fast, not as smooth, but with a weight the earth had always known and accommodated. His wound burned like a brand, and he blessed it because it kept him awake and honest. The ground between the king's tent and Renly's bright camp was not long, and it was longer than all the years of their childhood. They moved across it like men crossing from story into fact. Men stirred as they passed, hands going to weapons, eyes blinking rain and sleep. The shape slid between cook fires, and a pot boiled over unnoticed because no one's eyes told them to take it off the flame. They reached the edge of Renly's line when the wind died and the rain grew fine as breath. The shadow gathered itself in a place between two guy ropes, and if a birth could be seen, perhaps it looks like that when it happens in a world that has no right to see it. It thickened, became a curve, and then an angle. For a flicker of a heartbeat, Robert thought of women in labor and the way they cried when they broke a second before they made a thing whole. He hated himself for the thought and loved that it had come anyway, because he was not a slab of meat on a throne. He was a man. The shadow lengthened and then took a step that was not a step. Barristan flung himself between it and the flap of Renly's tent with a sound like a man giving his breath away. The sword cut through the dark like a pen on vellum. The shadow reached toward him, and the cloak on his shoulder froze as if a frost had seized just that patch. He kept his feet. He struck again. The tent flap lifted from within as if someone had woken and moved in fog. Robert threw his voice one more time, into the seam where two possibilities met like the edges of cloth. "Brother," he roared. "Renly!" A hand inside the tent pushed the flap aside. A guard shouted something and then lost it. Renly stepped out, bareheaded, hair flattened by sleep and haste, and a smile half-formed on his face the way it might if he were about to invite a man to share a jest. He saw the shadow or did not. Robert could not tell which because in that instant the shadow was both there and only implied. Renly did see Robert. He saw Barristan. He saw Davos behind them, eyes wide as low tide. "Robert," he said. The crown was not on his head. He had left it on a stand. He wore only a simple tunic, and it made him look younger and more dangerous. "You're..." The wind came back, a thin keening that moved the canvas and made the guy ropes hum. The shadow bent. It reached for the place where Renly stood. It reached the way a man might reach to pluck a fruit he had learned to love too much and too quickly. Robert moved without thought, the way men move in dreams when they suddenly find the thing they have always wanted to do resting under their skin and needing only a strike to be real. He stepped into the space between the not thing and his brother. His wounded belly screamed and then turned its voice to a deeper thing and sang, a line of pain that ran along him clean as a plucked taut string. He lifted his hand not as a fist, not as a man takes a weapon, but as if catching a boy's arm to dress him down for running too near a cliff. The shadow paused, met his palm, and Robert gripped the air as if it were a wrist. For a heartbeat, he felt it, something cold and precise, like the memory of a bone under flesh. He squeezed. It was nothing, and it was there. Tried to slide along him, and he held it, and the feeling was like gripping a rope of water and forcing the water to remember it had once been ice. He swore a word that would have made the septa drop her censers, and then the candle that burned on the table just inside Renly's tent guttered and went out. Darkness fell onto the little space like a thrown cloak, and in that darkness the thing twisted. It slipped his grip. Barristan's sword passed where his hand had been and did not take it. Davos flung himself in front of the tent, arms wide, and the shadow ran past the place where his body was and was not, and touched the tent wall as if it had been the flank of a horse and melted into it like rain into cloth. Renly and Robert looked at each other in the sudden black. The only light now was the shabby, humankind from cookfires almost spent. Robert heard his brother's breath. It was fast and full of life. He loved him with a force that had nowhere gentle to go. He could not see Stannis in this darkness, but he felt him, too, like the memory of a nail driven true. No one moved, as if movement would invite the thing to call again at their threshold, as if stillness could be a spell the old gods recognized. The candle in the tent took a breath and came back to a small, stubborn flame. The light licked Renly's cheek and made him look older and kinder than he had earlier, as if the night had taught him something in the space of that little death. Barristan lowered his sword slowly, every line of him attentive. Davos looked at his hands as if they had done something he had not commanded, and he wanted to count their bones to convince himself they were his still. Robert wanted to speak. He did not. He stood in the wind and let the rain find all the hot places on his skin and cool them. Somewhere out beyond their sight, in the other camp, a woman was raising her hands to a god with one name and many shadows. Somewhere in the deep belly of that castle, an old lord, whoever held the walls, turned over in his sleep and told a dream he would not remember to his pillow. Somewhere on the far roads, a boy in a rough cloak walked alone with hunger as a friend, as he once had, and all of it was the realm, the thing he had always claimed but had never learned to cradle. He took one breath, then another, anchoring himself in that simple count, as once he had counted the seconds between lightning and thunder with Stannis beside him in a cold room while Renly slept through the storm. Here he was, and here were his brothers, and there were the shadows that would take what they could. He put his hand on Renly's shoulder. The bone under his palm felt human as anything had ever felt. Behind them, from the darkness near the bluff, a different sound rose. A low, gathering moan from the sea that had nothing to do with witchcraft and everything to do with the world remembering its old habits. The wind shifted again. Fires woke in both camps as men stoked them and made them mutter. Rain freshened its assault against canvas. Robert stood there with his hand on his brother's shoulder and felt, not for the first time, how small a man was and how heavy his choices could be all the same. They stood as if the night had pressed them into a tableau carved into wet wood, the three of them gathered by a tent that sighed under wind. Renly looked out toward nothing particular, as if the darkness itself had made the gesture he had always loved best, the open-handed invitation to come nearer. He did not smile. Robert did not take his hand from his brother's shoulder until he felt the torchlight of other men drawing toward them, then let it fall as he always did, as if that had been enough and too much both. When the first of the Reachmen reached them, blazoned and breathless, their faces made a small theater of shock, then calculation. One of them knelt on wet ground without waiting for others to do it, and the gesture rippled down the line. Some from love, some from fear, some because any man will bend if the man beside him does. Robert felt the old thing rise in his chest, not pride exactly but kin to it, the sense of being recognized by the air. It was not a good feeling. It was not a bad one. It was a thing he had. "Back to your fires," Robert said, not shouting. He did not need to shout. "Bar your tent lines and keep your blades close. You will not chase phantoms, and you will not whisper another man's name into this rain as if it were a curse until daylight. That is my word." They melted back as men do when told they may go from a place where fear has stood with them. Loras lingered. His green armor had taken on the night's color, and he seemed to glow from within, like something made to be admired in courtyards and then taught pain on roads. He looked at Renly's throat, as if he might find a mark there to swear against. Finding none, he watched Robert instead and could not hide that he had liked him too much once and had left that liking to go cold and did not know what to do with it now that it had warmed itself again without asking leave. "You had guards," Loras said to Renly, as accusation and apology both. Renly's mouth flexed. "I had a brother," he said, and the words made Loras flush and Barristan's chin lift by the smallest degree. Davos stood with his cloak shedding water. looking toward the darker dark where Stannis' line lay. "There'll be stir in that camp too," he said, almost to himself. "The men feel the turn in the wind even if they don't see its shape. They won't sleep, nor should they. We will not let this night come twice," Robert said. "Barristan, double the watches where the camps edge each other. Put men with old legs and clear eyes between the lads who'd prefer to pass time trading sleights. If there is steel drawn, it will be against shadows or on my order." Ser Barristan went to it with that noiseless decisiveness that had made Robert keep him near when he had cast away so many other good things out of carelessness or boredom or wine. Loras hovered like a bright fly that wanted to sting and did not dare. In the end, he made a small, stiff bow to Robert and dissolved into the lines of Renly's guard with a stiffness that was as good as a confession. Davos remained, because moving would have made him more anxious. Robert liked him for that. He liked men whose bodies obeyed their sense rather than their fear. "Do you know what that was?" Renly asked at last, when there were only the four of them and the rain could be heard counting again on the tent. "A thing that should not have been sent into a king's camp while the king breathes," Robert said. Davos rubbed his thumb against the stumps of his finger bones. He did that when his mind hurt and he needed to make pain behave. "I've been around men who would sell a scrap of their luck for a penny," he said. "I've seen a mother leave off praying, because she reckoned the gods had gone as far with her as they'd go and she'd be better off with a good tide and a bit of wind. I never took to priests much. The Red Woman, she has men thinking a tide can be commanded like a mule. That was a tide in the shape of a hand, or the shape of a memory of a hand. If you ask me, I know you didn't, but you'll forgive me. I'd send her out a camp tonight on a boat with no oars." Robert breathed out through his nose. He thought of Stannis' face, how it had looked when he had wrapped his hands around him earlier. The way a drowning man might take hold of a piling not because he loved it but because it had always been where it should be, always strong in the same place. "I will speak to Stannis," he said, which was not the same thing as saying he would do as Davos wished and yet was a promise that could be kept. "Renly, you will not answer this insult with one of your own in the dark. If you would be king of men, learn to sleep when they make noises outside your tent." Renly's laugh came, small and reluctant. "You have a poet hidden in that belly somewhere," he said. "I suppose he's bound and gagged most days." "He was eaten long ago," Robert said, and felt the sting that always came when he made japes about his own fall from some never quite defined height. "Go, sleep if you can. Loras, sleep for him if he won't." Loras colored again and pretended he had not heard the equality in the insult. He took Renly's arm the way a man takes a flagstaff in wind and drew him away. Davos watched them go with a face that could not decide if it were glad or sorry, and then turned with Robert into the tent where Ned waited. The lines of his face sharpened by the lack of sleep and by that other thing he always carried, the quiet, hard thing from the north. They sat, and no one reached for wine. The candle flame steadied again. Ned looked at Robert's middle, not from prurience but because it was his way to see the wound before he asked the man. "You tore something," he said, matter of fact. "It will hold," Robert said. "If I am made to lie still again, I will not." Ned grunted assent at a thing that had never been a request. "That was not a natural thing," he said. "The old gods take men's lives like wind takes leaves. That had a will." "It had someone's will," Robert said. He let his hands rest flat on his knees. He thought of the little sensation in his palm when he had gripped at the empty air, how a nothing had become briefly a something and then gone again. He thought of the way the candle had died and then lived. He thought of being a boy and Stannis a boy, and a wind that had driven rain so hard against the thick glass that he had imagined it might come through as needles. He stood then and grimaced as his belly complained of being asked to bear weight and decision at once. "I will speak to Stannis." Davos rose at once. "You'll not walk into a man's camp alone the night after his priestess has sent shadows to kill his brother," he said, blunt as a rope end. "Forgive my words. Bring me with you or bring 100, but don't bring no one." "I'll bring one," Robert said. "You." He took Barristan as well, not for the sword but for the weight of his presence where swords were a possible answer. The three of them crossed the wet lane between the camps, and the sentries let them pass because there are some shapes even the night knows and yields to. A horse stamped and then grew very quiet, as if embarrassed to have made a sound at all. The smell in Stannis's quarter was different, colder, the food more salt and less spice in the air, and the men less given to mutter. They did not make way so much as they ceased to be obstacles. Robert liked them for that too. He had always liked the sort of man who would not perform hollow courtesies in the rain. Stannis was awake. Robert had known he would be. He stood under a rope-stretched awning, looking toward the sea's black mouth as if trying to force it to admit some secret he suspected all along. The Red Woman stood a little apart, hair darkened by wet until it might have been any woman's. Only her eyes held the color the rain had not stolen. She turned those eyes on Robert, and for the first time in a long while he had to resist the childish urge to make a face. He inclined his head instead the way one might to a troublesome relative at a feast. "I see you. I will not set cutlery flying." "Brother," Stannis said. It was accusation and demand, as before, and gratitude too. It surprised Robert how much of that last he heard after the night's shadow had passed near Renly's tent and not his. "I have heard enough alarms tonight to make a man deaf. I have come to save your ears and my patience," Robert said. "There was witchcraft in my camp." The Red Woman did not flinch at the word. It seemed to please her the way a blasphemy pleases a drunk when he finds it still has power to shock. "There was a test," she said. "The night is full of hands. Some take, some lift. The Lord of Light can keep his sermons for men who choose them," Robert snapped. "Keep your God out of my tent and out of my brother's beds. Stannis, you will send this woman from your camp under the light of morning, and you will not let her return where men who wear my stag sleep. If you need her, you may keep her on the far shore. I'll settle for water between you, if not sense." Stannis's mouth became stone. "You would order my faith," he said, as if tasting the words to see if they were poison. "I would order my realm," Robert said, and felt the rightness of saying it. He had not said it often enough in past years. He had ordered wine and hunts and women and jests, and once he had ordered a boy to be spared and then not seen that order through. He had not ordered his realm. He had let men like Tywin Lannister order it for him and told himself a hammer used rarely is worth more. "I am no Septon. Pray to whatever idol gets you through your day. But you will not send sorcery like a knife into my camp while I breathe. If you do, I will gut whatever fish carries it with my own hands and hang it from your tent pole." Davos stood very still, as a dog will when his master and a stranger square off and he knows that any move is a wrong one. Barristan looked down at a seam in the ground and then at the Red Woman's face and then at Stannis as if weighing the steel of each. "She was not sent to your brother?" Melisandre said softly, and something like amusement touched the corner of her mouth. "She went where darkness gathers. You cannot ask Shadow to prefer one cup over another. Takes the deepest one. Do shadows prefer the cups you point at?" Davos said, not quite sneering. "Do they learn a man's face the way a hound knows a master? I saw a thing tonight that I would not have seen when I was a lad because I'd have had my eyes full of tide and nothing else matters when a tide is running. I am old enough now to see tricks as well as miracles. Lady, forgive me, but you would do us a kindness if you let us keep our own shadows." Stannis's gaze moved to Davos and eased very slightly when it stopped there. "You would have me send away a woman whose counsel has borne me aid in place of men who have given me nothing but grudging respect and late obedience," he said. The dryness in his voice made Robert's teeth ache. "She has given me answers. Of a sort. She has given you poison that tastes like answers," Robert replied. "It is a fine vintage. Men drink it gladly, and then they find they no longer want bread." He took a step nearer, ignoring the tug in his gut and the flood of warm pain that followed. He looked his brother full in the face, those eyes like blue flint, that stubborn mouth that had taken so many blows without breaking. "I will not demand you cast off your god while the old gods sleep and the seven forget their own faces. But I will not sleep in a camp with sorcery slinking through it. I am not asking, Stannis. I am telling. Put her on a ship at dawn. Let her chase what light she wants on Dragonstone. Keep her from my lines." Stannis stared at him. The wind whipped at the awning. The rope sang a little. In the corner of Robert's eye, Davos shifted his weight like a man who had chosen a side and was preparing his bones for the consequences. The Red Woman looked as if she were listening to a distant music none of them could hear. At last Stannis' shoulders dropped a fraction. He looked toward the sea instead of at Robert, which was his way of saying yes without giving up the pleasure of saying no later. "I will send her to Dragonstone," he said. "She will go aboard at dawn with a proper guard. She will not return to this camp while you keep yours. If you leave, she returns. And if she returns while I stay," Robert said quietly, "I will hang her from your own gallows." Melisandre's smile was nothing like a woman's. It remembered heat but did not have to keep any for itself. "Kings of shadow fear to look upon the sun," she murmured. "You have stood in shade so long your eyes ache at any brightness." "I've stared into better fires than you can make," Robert said, "and I have pissed them out." Davos made a noise like a man swallowing laughter and fear. Barristan's mouth twitched and then made itself smooth again. Stannis closed his eyes briefly and opened them. That was his prayer and his thanks both. "At dawn," he said. Robert turned and left, because there are victories one must not examine for fear of finding them smaller than they look. He walked back between lines of men who watched him from under wet lashes and pretended not to. Ned stood at the entry to the neutral pavilion, arms folded, a part of the rope and pole and rein somehow. When Robert reached him, he unfolded, and his hands found the straps of the tent, as if he meant to hold the world in place while the king walked through it. "He'll do it?" Ned asked. "He will," Robert said. "He will do it because I have named it and because he can tell himself there is honor in obedience. He will take it up later like a debt to be paid back with interest. That is all right. I will be here to count it." They slept in snatches, as men do before something that looks like a day of decision. When the gray came that is not yet light but is not darkness either, men were already moving. Stannis' men packed with the quiet efficiency of men used to leaving places clean. Renly's men with the bustle of men used to being seen and judged for how well they did their tasks. On the shingle below the bluff, a boat bumped and kissed the pilings. The tide had brought a larger craft in under cover of night, or had been waiting. Melisandre walked down to it with a small bundle and no sign that she had ever occupied anything as trivial as a tent. Davos walked behind with a pair of men-at-arms who wore stag and tower both. He had chosen the guards with the care of a man selecting fish for a royal table. Fresh eyes, firm hands, no taste for tricks. Stannis came to the shore and did not touch her, and that was another kind of honesty. She turned, not to him but to the bluff where Robert stood with Ned and Barristan. Her eyes found him and did not flinch. She lifted her hand briefly in a gesture that might have been blessing and might have been a promise. Then she stepped into the boat without needing a hand. They pushed off and she did not look back again. The little craft moved across water that had remembered how to be green even under gray and climbed a ship's side. Men worked lines in a clatter that was almost cheerful for the relief it meant. Sails bellied. The boat turned toward the darker line that was Dragonstone out there, a tooth and a memory. Davos stood long after until the ship had shrunk to a different sort of smudge and the gulls had given up following it. When he came back up the slope, Robert met him halfway. "Thank you," he said simply. Davos scratched at the stubble on his jaw, embarrassed by gratitude, which he trusted far less than he trusted wrath. "We'll see if it was thanks worth giving," he said. "That's a clever woman. Clever folk don't often need a boat to come back." "We'll stack driftwood and see if she cares for our fires then," Robert replied, and for a moment they were two men on a quay talking weather and fish, and the burdens they carried were in their pockets rather than on their shoulders. They ate oatcakes and cheese because no one had had time to fuss and because the body wants bread before it wants glory. After, Robert walked to the edge of the rise and looked at Storm's End. He did not go in. He could not have borne the smell of the place the way it was now without dragging up every stink of hunger from the deep places in his nose. But he let his eyes climb the curve of wall, traced the stair the wind cut on it, the place where rain gathered and fled, and he thought of boys with turned pockets and a smuggler's boat like a miracle. He thought, too, of Edric Storm, that quick dark boy, one of his byblows left here to grow straight in a place that turned men into spears. He had not gone to him in the night because the night had been full, but now he sent for the lad and his guardian with a word. Ser Courtenay Penrose came with the boy, salt crusted on his brown beard, cloak clasped plain, eyes the exact color of the sea under this sky. He bowed in the old Stormland's way, a little stiff bend that had been used outside this castle long enough that it smelled of honesty rather than habit. Edric bowed deeper, watching Robert with a curiosity that had not yet learned to hide itself. He had Caitlyn's steady way of looking at a man, except it was not Caitlyn's. It was the honesty of youth that had not yet been taught caution. "Edric," Robert said, and let the name sit in his mouth. The sound of it was simple and satisfying. "Your Grace," the boy said. He had a voice that would carry one day. "Ser Courtenay says I am to mind my tongue. If you have something worth saying, let it wag," Robert said, grinning despite everything. "When men don't let it wag at all, it chokes them later." Edric's eyes flicked to the castle and back. "Storm's End says I am to be proud and not to be prideful," he said. "I don't know the difference in my belly yet. It's a small piece of meat and it is never cooked the same way twice," Robert told him, pleased as if he had been given something. "You'll learn it by being hungry for it. Do you still run the walls when the rain lets you?" Edric smiled, and there he looked like Robert, not in the shape of his face but in the way joy made him a little foolish and unashamed of it. "Only when Ser Courtenay looks the other way," he said. "He says the wind will pinch my ears off and bring them to him in his helm.
Se Cornais mo tuisha.
It would be a mercy to spare us his listening," he said, dry as a wave withdrawing. Robert's laughter came full this time and did not bleed him for it. He studied the night a moment. "Courtenay Penrose," he said, and the name came with a flavor of old bread. "Nothing fancy, the kind that keeps a man upright through work. You have held this place clean. You will hold it again when we leave. There's a smell coming north that I do not love. I'll want Storm's End to smell the sea and itself and not what blows from the lion's dens." "It will be as you say," Courtenay said. He looked briefly toward Stannis' camp and then toward Renly's banners and then down at the boy, and for a heartbeat Robert saw all the calculations happening in him and how none of them had to do with his own advantage. He respected the man in that moment as much as he had ever respected a knight. "We ride at noon," Robert said. "Both camps. We will take the Storm Road to the King's Road. Stannis' men on the seaward flank. Renly's on the landward. No torches at night. No singing after the second hour after sunset. If any man draws on his brother, he will lose the hand or the head depending on how much he has drawn. If any man speaks a lion's name with fondness, he will have to speak it to my face. I am done being embarrassed by what men dare say under my own banners." Ravens went up with letters smelling of wet feather and man's grease. Robert kept the young maester close and dictated in a slow voice that made the boy write better than he could have under scolding. One went to Cersei with no title but her name and said this: "I come. Put away your household into Maegor's holdfast, and do not set your son on my throne until I have set my hand upon the chair's arm. Keep peace. There is bread for you if you take it and ash if you choose it." One went to Janos Slint, and Robert did not bother with flattery there either. "Muster your gold cloaks at the mud gate at dawn on the 4th day hence. You will open for your king and you will keep order. If there is blood in the streets you did not order shed, you will drink it." One to Tywin Lannister, and there Robert did allow the formality of titles if only to show he had not forgotten how to use them. "My lord of Casterly Rock, call back your dogs from the Riverlands and present yourself at King's Landing within a fortnight of my return to answer for their work. If you do not, your defiance will name itself treason, and I will come west with storms enough to wash your father's sweat out of your stones." They were words that would be mocked in a Lannister hall. Robert wanted them mocked. He wanted laughter there sharp enough to cut. He had Ned take one to Maester Coleman in the Eyrie, because he could not stomach writing to Lisa. It said, "You hold my friend's boy at your pleasure under color of law. I command you release Tyrion Lannister into the custody of the Crown's men to be brought to King's Landing for judgment by his king. You will do this if you remember your oath. Ned added a line of his own to the man he knew. This will cool rather than heat the war that is coming if we are not careful. Do not let her pride make something of it that it is not. He had never been a man for letters, yet he felt something settle in him as the ravens took the air. To say a thing and then do it has a flavor all its own. Before noon, he walked with Ned along the ground between the camps. The men pretended to be occupied with straps and packs and quiet jests. Their eyes followed. Ned's limp from the old street fight with Jaime Lannister made itself known when they walked quickly. He did not apologize for it. Robert slowed when he saw it and did not make a show of slowing, which was the best kindness they could exchange. You confronted Cersei, Robert said, and the words came as a statement because he already knew. The knowledge had been a slow, cool stream under all else since Ned had said the words in the tent. The boy with his mother's eyes, and Robert had not drunk of it because the other water in his mouth had been hotter. Now he let himself drink. In the Godswood, Ned said, I told her to take her children and flee before you returned from the hunt. I told her the truth, and I offered her a corner of mercy as I would to a man I admired who had made an error in the dark. She declined. She had already decided which cards she would keep and which she would throw. She knew she had your son's ear and your father-by-law's gold and the fear of men hungry for favor. She did not think you would ride south to stand between your brothers. She thought you would bleed out on a bed and leave her to her games. Robert let that sit in his chest until it felt at home there, then nodded. If you had told me, I would have killed them, he said very low. The boys, the girl. I say that to you because you are the only one I can say it to and not be made a monster by saying it. He stared down at the grass until he realized that he was memorizing it like a man who did not intend to ever see grass again. I am glad you did not tell me. I did not tell you because I knew what it would make of you, Ned said. And because the law is a thing men must see done and not just hear has been done. I wanted to set it out properly. I failed. You were stabbed by a boar and I was stabbed by my own honor, and she was laughing into her hand. I will not kill children, Robert said, and felt the shape of the words with each finger as if they had been carved for him. Not mine, not even when mine are not mine. But I will not leave the realm to be twisted because I was too fond of the sound of their laughter. I will send them away, and I will put their mother away, and I will say the thing that is true in the bright light where men can see my mouth form the words. Stannis will hear you, Ned said. Renly will hear what he wishes and what is wise in different measures. Tywin will hear nothing. He paused, watching a knot of men wrestle a barrel onto a cart and fail, then succeed by lifting with their legs instead of their backs, as if he were reminded of something by the simple physics of it. When you say the thing that is true, bring men to stand near you who do not love you and do not hate you. If every face in the hall is one that has smiled at you for meat and at your jests, the truth will grow fat and then sick. I will bring faces that have told me no, Robert said. You, Stannis, Barristan, even old Pycelle will do if I let him imagine he is teaching me how to say it in Latin. Perhaps I will bring that onion-smelling bastard as well. Davos, Ned supplied, with a ghost of a smile. He will speak across candles if he must. He has learned to be plain in places where plainness is a kind of grace. They rode at noon as promised. The storm road took them along the cliffs, where the sea ranted and sulked and then laughed, all in a quarter hour. The wind came at their backs and then decided it would taste their faces instead. The rain made a veil and then took it away and then put it back on. The camps moved like two beasts yoked to a burden they were not eager to share. Where the lines lay nearer, Barristan placed old men with scarred lips to speak quietly when young men wanted to bark. Where the lines lay farther, riders shuttled like ants bearing news and balancing insults on their shoulders without letting them spill. The second day out, a brace of Tyrell men fell into sneering over bread with a pair of Stormlanders in Stannis' colors. One called the other's mother a goat and then expanded on the similarities, and in another place it would have been a jape. Here it tasted of blood before it was even done being said. Loras had his hand on his sword. A wiry knight under Stannis' banner had his hand on his hilt too, and no hesitation in his eyes. Barristan stepped between them with nothing in his hands and did not so much speak as look until both men remembered that they were not boys at a market. Loras waited until later to find Barristan by a stream where the horses were watered and spoke with a courtesy that had teeth. "You will not always be there to put yourself in the path," he said. Barristan tied a knot with the slow care of an old sailor who had once saved a ship with such a knot and never forgot the day. "Then you will have to learn to move after you have counted to 5 in your head," he said. "I have made it a very fine number. I recommend it." Mace Tyrell tried to feed the whole march with creams and soft breads the 3rd day, and men laughed and ate and then cursed him because the milk went sour in the saddlebags and he had secured fewer sacks of salt beef than sense would dictate. Stannis's quartermaster swallowed his disdain and traded 2 carts of dried cod for a promise that there would be no flowers stuck in the bread on the morrow. Robert watched the transaction with interest and wondered if he had been a fool never to enjoy the quiet satisfaction of watching 2 men solve a problem by swapping equal inconveniences. At night, the torch lines of the 2 camps burned like sullen stars across the good dark. Robert sat with Ned and Davos and Barristan and once with Renly and Loras both and spoke of nothing for a time. A story about a falcon at the Eyrie that had mistaken a boy's thumb for a vole. A tale of a storm that had parted curtains in a sept and let down birds into the candles. The way salt will creep out of a barrel even in the dry and gather like frost along wood. The talk did what it was meant to do. It made the night less full of the last shadow. Only once did Stannis come to such a fire, and then he stayed at its edge as if unwilling to take what light it made and yet too proud to turn his back on it. On the 4th day, a rider found them with mud up to his knees and a raven on his fist like a judgment. He brought a little parchment ribboned in green. Renly took it and read and did not smile. He handed it to Robert without a word. It was from Marjorie, and it was written in a neat hand that did not pretend to be untutored. It spoke briefly of stores taken in and men paid with fair measure, of a quarrel settled between a carpenter and a lord over a tree, of songs sung to keep spirits up at the back of the host and not to carry into Stannis's line. It did not say, "I am afraid" or "I am brave." It did not say, "I will be queen." It said, "My husband returned unharmed from a darkness I did not understand. He smiled in the morning. It was a good smile. Please keep him smiling. It will save lives." It ended with a drawing of a small rose that was better than such drawings usually are, which told Robert the girl had been taught to draw and had practiced to make it seem that she had not. "She is a good steward," Robert said. "She is good at making things look well kept," Renly said. And the words were fair and not spiteful, and that was new. "I will have to be better at keeping them." Dusk of the 6th day found them on the rise from which one could see the low smoke that always hangs over cities that are loved too well and not cared for hard enough. The walls of King's Landing lay like a tired dragon. The Blackwater curled like a cat's tail. Robert sat his horse and felt the old thrumming under his skin. He would have grinned if he had been a different man. As it was, he allowed himself to breathe a little deeper and let the smell of the city, fish and piss and bread and hot iron, come to him like a kick from a boy he had wrestled with and forgiven. They made their camp where the Storm Road meets the King's Road, and the fields begin to belong to men who could afford to count their yields rather than simply eat them. Robert did not let either army press nearer. He sent riders to the Mud Gate and the King's Gate and the Lion Gate with words for the men who wore cloaks there. He sent Barristan ahead in plain mail with a plain cloak that did not scream his white, and Ned with him, and Davos too for the smell of the docks. He went himself when the sun had healed enough that shadows threw the city's lines onto itself. He did not wear a crown. He wore a cloak lined with old fur, and he took a hammer on his saddle, not because he meant to use it but because it felt right there. The men who saw it made noises they had not made in years, small ones, almost private. The gold cloaks mustered at the Mud Gate as he had commanded, though Janos Slint tried to make it look as if he had thought of it first. They looked tired and honest and bought in equal measure. Robert rode along the line and looked into faces and did not disguise his own, which had always been the only thing that made men like this decide one way or another when they could have gone either. He drew himself up on a little stand of wood some carpenter had used to judge a wall and looked down at Janos Slint. "You have kept order," he said. "There has been blood where there should have been bruises and bruises where there should have been a word. But the gates stand and the markets sell fish that will kill no man. For this I do not hang you. For other things you have done I do not yet. You will take a rest. You will give your baton to Jacelyn Bywater, and you will go home and see if your wife still knows your name." Janos Slint went very pale and then very red, and then something in him folded like wet bread. "Your Grace," he said. He had meant to say a great deal more. Men always do when their feet are being moved under them. He said no more. Jacelyn Bywater stepped up and took the baton like a man receives a child he intends to raise well whether or not he is the father. His face was a plain board. His eyes were a carpenter's nails. The city felt this change the way an old horse feels a lighter rider and decides it might go another mile. The people pressed and craned, and their voices made a low sound like bees under rain. Robert saw faces he remembered without their names, and one or two faces with names, and one boy's face that could have been his many times over, brown hair and a stubborn set to the mouth, and he smiled at that boy briefly because it cost him nothing and gave something. Cersei did not come to the gate. She would not. She waited in the throne room because that is where she saw herself in all her best stories. The throne itself loomed, and she had always wanted to lean her back against it like a lover. She stood beside it in green and gold with her hair the careful work of clever hands, and with Joffrey on her right and Tommen on her left and Myrcella near enough to take hold of if she panicked. Varys watched with damp eyes that saw far. Littlefinger smiled with a mouth that had taught many men to trust it and many to regret it. Pycelle breathed as if even breath should be deferential to the sovereign. Ares Oakhart and Meryn Trant and Boros Blunt shifted their weight and tried not to look at each other. The hound slouched and scratched and was the only man there who disguised nothing at all. When Robert strode in, there were men who caught their breath because a hall remembers a man's shape if he has filled it properly. He did not pause at the door, and he did not look up at the swords behind the throne because he knew what they were and what they were not. He stopped at the foot of the dais and did not climb it. He did not look at the throne. He looked at the boy who wore his name. Joffrey's face did not move for a long heartbeat. It had always been a good face for not moving until it had decided what was safe to do. He did not kneel. He did not smile. He stared at Robert and then at the hammer at his back and then at the lines around his eyes and then at his mother's hand on his arm like a bolt. Tommen, bless the child, made a motion to kneel and then stopped because the hand on his shoulder had stopped him. Myrcella looked at her father with open, uncertain joy that made Robert want to rip the room apart and take her out into air that did not have so much gold in it. "Wife," Robert said to Cersei. He did not call her queen. She knew he did not, and it was a blade drawn between them. "You have kept my hall tidy. I have kept your children safe," she said, not bowing, because she bowed with her words when she wished to and not with her back. "Good," Robert said. He turned his head slightly and spoke, but his eyes stayed on the boy. "Lord Varys, if there is a sword drawn in the city that is not drawn on my order, I will place you upon its point to keep it busy. Lord Baelish, bring me my gold where I can see it work. Grand Maester, do not sigh until I ask you a question. Hound, keep your teeth for lions." Sandor's mouth showed his teeth in something that might have been amusement and might have been the rehearsal of it. "Aye, your grace," he said. He was the only man there who sounded like he believed in something, and the something was simple, that he could break a man in half. Robert lifted his hand. Barristan stepped to his side by habit, and Ned stood on his other side by choice. The room hushed as if a wind had dropped. Robert let the silence swell until it covered even Cersei's brittle readiness, and then he broke it. "There has been whisper," he said. "Whisper serves spiders. Whispers do men's work when men are too fond of their own voices. I have ridden south under two banners and under none. I have ridden with my brothers and with my own anger. I have come into my own hall and found you standing with crowns in your mouths. I will say a thing now and you will hear it and you will live by it." He did not begin with the bastardy. He did not begin with law. He began with bread. "You will open the granaries on the street of Flower and the granaries on the hill," he said. "You will do it now, not tomorrow. You will sell the grain at a fair price, not the price the merchants named in their dreams. You will give each man 1 sack, and you will not give a second sack until you have given one to the man behind him. If there is blood in the street because you grow clumsy with a tally, I will know it and I will make a tally of my own. Lord Baelish, the coin for this will leave your counting houses and enter the bellies of men. Smile if you like while you do it. I do not care. Littlefinger inclined his head with a smile that could not help itself. The way a cat cannot help twitching when it sees a thing that can be batted. As you command, your grace, he said. His eyes slid to Varys and then to Cersei and then away again. Numbers had already begun to run somewhere behind them. Varys Tan, Robert said without looking. Find Jacelyn Bywater. Put him to the gates. The watch is his. If Janos Slint walks in your path, push him aside. Varys Tan moved, and the white cloak followed him like winter follows a sown field. Robert took a breath that cost him and tasted like hot iron and spoke the words he had kept as a stone in his hand since the road. The boy you call king is not my son, he said. He is not the son of my seed. He is his mother's making. The law says what it says. The law says that when a king leaves bastards and a wife who has put horns on him for a crown, the crown goes to the next of his blood who is fit to bear it. I am not dead. While I live, I am king. When I die, the law will be the law. Stannis is my brother. He is elder to Renly. He has kept my house when I did not. He will be king when I am food for worms unless the gods drop the wall of the world on our heads before then. Silence is never truly silent in a room full of men who love and hate. It makes many small sounds. There was a sound like a ring striking wood very lightly, that had been Pycelle's hand hitting the arm of his chair, forgetting itself. There was the little sigh Varys made when he saw a thing he had suspected and wished to confirm and now was sorry to know for certain. There was the sound of Cersei's breath coming in and catching, like a woman's before a birth and like a man's before a killing both. And then the sound of Joffrey laughing once without humor because he had been trained to laugh like that when a jest was made at another's expense, and he had not yet learned that sometimes he was the other. Cersei's eyes went bright and flat. You will not shame me in my own hall and call it law, she said. You will not drag my children into your drunken repentance and call it virtue. I have kept your house. I have borne what you could not be bothered to bear. I have made a king. You have made a boy who likes to cut cats, Robert said. The words were soft and the softness made them heavier. You have made a lie of my fatherhood and a war of my peace. I will not kill your children. I will not parade them naked through the streets to be spat at by men who envy that they wore silks. I will not turn you out naked either, but I will not let you stand by that throne and call it yours. You will go to Maegor's Holdfast. You will remain there until I say otherwise. You will take your children there with you. They will eat well. They will not see steel unless I decide they should. If you flee, I will take it as a confession of guilt and I will call it treason. If you raise a hand to open my granaries, I will cut it off. Joffrey found his voice, and it was one he had practiced to sound like a man's and so sounded more like a boy pretending to be a hound. I am the king, he said. I will not be sent to bed by a fat. Robert took 2 steps before the words were done, and his hand moved before anyone else's could. He did not strike the boy. He put his hand on his neck just as he had placed it on Renly's shoulder under the rain. The touch was gentle enough that it made Joffrey go still, not because it hurt, but because it surprised him to feel such a thing there. Robert looked into his eyes and saw his mother looking back, and someone else besides, a cruel joke written in the bones of the face. You may be lord of the bedroom one day, Robert said. You may be lord of a kennel if you like. You will not be king. You will not be head of this realm. You will not be the reason men burn and women starve and boys die with their bellies cut open in ditches because you like the sound of men saying yes and do not know what to do when they say no. You will go to the Holdfast and you will learn to read better than the letter of your own name. You will learn to weigh bread as well as gold. If you try to leave, I will nail your feet to the floor with laws. Cersei had stepped forward without meaning to. Her hand had lifted and then fallen. Robert looked at her then and called her by her name again. Cersei, he said, do not break yourself on this. You are too smart to be such a fool. If she had wept then, she might have won a battle she was going to lose later anyway. She did not. She was too proud. Her mouth thinned to a line that had made 1,000 men say yes and one now say no. "You will be sorry," she said quietly. "You will be sorry you did not die in the wood." "I am sorry for so many things," Robert said. "I will be sorry for more, but I will not be sorry for this." He signaled. Jacelyn Bywater was there before the thought had quite finished being thought. He did something that impressed Robert more than many swinging acts of daring he had seen. He gently took Joffrey's elbow and said, "My prince," as if to a boy who had scraped his knee, and turned him toward the side door that led to the covered way to the holdfast. The gold cloaks fell in without the flourish Janos had once demanded from them. Joffrey struggled and then did not. Cersei walked with them because she would never be left behind when the thing she wanted to control was being moved. Tommen went meek and curious. Myrcella looked back at Robert and then at Ned and then at the Hound and then went with her brother because she loved him. The Hound fell in alongside without being ordered and made a face like a man who has decided to take out the garbage without being thanked. When they had gone, Varys sighed properly. "Your Grace," he said, "you have done a very brave thing." "I have done a very late thing," Robert answered. He looked up at the swords in the wall then, because he had finally earned the right to do it without flinching. They looked like what they were, trophies bent to a purpose that had never quite fit them. "Summon the lords in the city. Send word to Stannis and to Renly that I will speak again when both are under my roof. Send for the small folk to gather at the foot of the hill tomorrow at noon. I will speak to them as well for once. If a man cannot tell a truth to a fishmonger, he has no right to say it to a lord." Littlefinger's smile grew more interesting. Varys bowed his head with all sincerity and none. Pycelle coughed and began to speak Latin and was waved silent. Ser Barristan returned with a nod that told Robert without words that the watch now had a spine. Ned put a hand on Robert's arm for a second, the old grip that had pulled him to his feet after knocks in their youth and had held him back from too much wine on 3 or 4 nights that had mattered. "You will have enemies for this," Ned said.
"Yeah.
"D enemies when I was a boy riding to kiss Jon Arryn's hand," Robert said. "I am only now remembering how to choose them." That night, the Red Keep felt like a different building. Stannis came with a measured pace and eyes that counted how many steps of the stair had been replaced since last he cared to look. Renly came with a lighter step and paused to admire a tapestry he had admired when he was younger and had had time to admire such things, and then remembered he was meant to be angry and turned his face back to that shape. They were brought to a small chamber off the great hall that had belonged to kings who liked to drink without 1,000 eyes watching. Robert had loved it once and had not used it enough. The table there was scarred by cups and knives and ink. Robert liked it even more for those scars. He told them what he had told the hall. He watched the news land in Stannis' face like a stone sinking a little farther into water that had been waiting for it. He watched the news move across Renly's like a lantern going from one side of a tent to another, making different shapes with the same shadows. "It is the law," Stannis said, and it was not triumph. It was relief edged with fresh burden. "We will write it. We will make the proclamations. We will speak it," Robert said, "and we will make sure the words are heard in the wine sinks and the barracks and the kitchens. I have learned that law written in a sept and not spoken in a stewpot is worth only as much as the candle it costs to see it." Renly leaned forward, palms flat on the scarred wood. "And me?" he said. "What am I in this neatness of yours? If I say yes now to Stannis, he will put my yes in a chest and lock it and throw the key in the Blackwater and remind me of it whenever I ask for bread instead of a rule. He will make a good king of a certain sort. We will be neat and poor and miserable and honest, and no one will sing, and the only men who will smile will be men with ledgers where their hearts should be. And that will be better than a boy with a cat and a knife. I do not know if it will be better than me." Robert rubbed at his beard and found salt there from the day's wind and smiled a little because it pleased him for no reason. "You will be the man who convinces men to do what they would rather not by making them feel as if they chose it," he said. "We will need that. You will be the man who knows when a feast is needed to keep a garrison from breaking. You will be the man who goes to Highgarden and has them send bread without having them send a poem along with it about their own generosity. You will be the man I send to Bastard's Cradle when some lord there has decided he prefers the old way of taking women on their wedding day. You will be the king's brother." If you want a crown, you will have to learn to want something else. Perhaps you will learn to want the realm more." Renly looked at him for a long time. His mouth was made for jests. It began to form one and stopped. At last he nodded once. "If I kneel now, it will not be to Stannis. I cannot pretend that I am happy for him." "You will kneel to me," Robert said. "You will kneel to the man who taught you to stand. And you will stand when I tell you to, and keep your knee to yourself when you are not told to bend it." "Stannis." He turned his head. "Your law is a hard bread. I will eat it, but you will eat some of Renly's soft bread when I tell you to. If you cannot, I will break one of you with the other and do it smiling." For a moment, both brothers looked at him with something like shock and then, against their will, with something like respect. He felt it like heat on his skin. He did not preen. He reached for a cup and drank water because wine would have been a triumph he had not earned. "For now," he said, setting the cup down where a knife had left a crescent mark years ago. "We have a city to calm, a lion to cage, and a kennel of wolves to keep from coming south because they think the south will eat their father. There are fires in the riverlands that were set with Lannister tinder. We will send men to stamp them, and we will stamp the hands that lit them." Ned stepped from the corner where he had kept his counsel and his quiet, and he stood straight despite the strange creak in his knee when he did so. "Aye, you will take men you trust," Robert said. "You will take 500 good Northmen from those who came with you, and 500 from Stannis's line, and 500 from Renly's. You will ride to the riverlands and sit your horse in front of the mountain and tell him I sent you to fetch him. If he does not come, you will bring back his head. If you cannot bring back his head, you will bring back the names of the men who protect him. Ser Barristan will give you a list of men who do not flinch when children scream. You will avoid them if you can and break them if you must." Ned inclined his head, eyes half closed as if seeing the roads unroll in his mind. He did not look eager. He looked ready. "Davos," Robert said, and the night had been quiet so long that the sound of his name in this bright room made him flinch as if a wave had slapped his boat. "You will go down river. You will see about boats. There is a fight on water coming to us. I smell it. I would like to be ready for it rather than surprised by it, as I usually am." Davos bowed awkwardly, as if his body had to remember a motion it had not been taught in youth. "Aye, your grace," he said. "I'll find you men who know which side of the river their boats should be on when the tide's running out." "And you," Robert said to Stannis, "will go to Dragonstone and set your house in order without your priestess to light your candles for you. If you bring her back into a camp of mine before I say, we will argue again, and the argument will be shorter." Stannis's mouth made that thin line again that had always reminded Robert of a pencil's last bit of lead. "I will set my house in order," he said. "I will bring you ships. I will bring you men who owe me their bones. In the morning, we will stand on the steps and talk to fishmongers," Robert said. "Get your sleep and your pride in equal measures. We will need both." They left one by one, and the room remembered their shapes for a moment each and then forgot them in the way rooms must. If rooms remembered too much, men would be unable to enter them without tripping over the past. Robert stayed a while after even Ned had gone. He listened to the drip somewhere in the stone. The Red Keep is full of little leaky secrets. And smelled the old smells the way a house smells, like the men who have lived in it even after they are gone. He put his hand on the scar in the wood in front of him and traced its curve with his thumb until he won a little piece from the contact. When he rose, his belly hurt and he stood anyway. He walked out into the corridor, and there, as if the gods wished him to have one thing that would make him hesitate on the road he had chosen, he saw Myrcella with a small lamp making her face a little pale moon under a veil of light. She was with a septa who had once smacked Robert's hand for taking a pastry when he was not meant to, and he almost laughed for the wrongness of everything being in its place like this for once. Myrcella's eyes went big, and she looked at him as if she had forgotten he existed and then remembered, and the remembering had made her glad. It was an honest look. He had seldom been given it by any of his children. "Father," she said softly. "Child," he said, and put his hand on her head for a moment the way a man puts it on a dog he loves in a way that is not unmanly. "Keep your brothers from biting." There are men here who will try to teach them to be lions. Teach them to be birds instead. Or fish. Anything that will not scratch the men who feed it." The septa made a small scandalized sound. Marcella smiled and nodded. She looked very much like her mother when she smiled and nothing like her at all. He loved her in that moment with a fierce, almost hateful love for the way it made him want to hurt other people who would hurt her. He walked away before the feeling made him foolish. He slept the sleep of a man who has made decisions and whose body will not let him forget them. He woke before light and walked to the balcony that looked down on the east. The city murmured far below, always a little awake. The river breathed. The sea beyond reminded them all of something older still. He looked at the place where the sky would cut itself and bleed day and thought of boys and men and hammers and lies and bread and law. He thought of the red woman sailing toward the black tooth in the sea, and of Davos finding oars and men with scars on their hands that matched the push and pull of rivers. He thought of Stannis and Renly lying under different roofs with their jaws set differently against the same morning. He thought of Cersei awake with her breath tight in her chest and a rage like wine warm in her. He thought of Tywin Lannister reading his letter and tilting his head like a man considering a horse's teeth and deciding how long it would serve before it needed to be put out to pasture or put to stud or put down. Tywin sat in a hall that had never known lack and read the king's words and let one eyebrow climb by a fraction that only men who had learned to watch him closely would notice. Tyrion leaned with a cup on a table that had seen more gold counted upon it than most kingdoms see in a decade, and watched his father's face as men do when they have learned that an inch there is a mile elsewhere. "Well," he said, "the king lives." "The king lives," Tywin said. He let the parchment lie a moment longer on his palm, as if weighing it, and then put it down with a care that looked like respect and was actually anger learning manners. "He orders me to call my dogs." He speaks of treason in a hand that shakes only in the places where it should and not in the places where it ought. "He remembers me at last." "Hard thing, being remembered," Tyrion said lightly. "I have often found it easier when people forget me. I do things then." "He remembers me as a hammer remembers the anvil," Tywin said. "He wishes me to ring and thinks it will be to his timing. We will gather the fires in the riverlands, because that is what we will do anyway. We will write a letter that smells like olive oil and good counsel. We will tell him that my men who burned were not mine, that brigands light their own torches when they smell chaos but that Lannister steel puts them out. We will send him a purse to open his granaries if he has not already. We will wait. We will see if the man who has remembered he is king will remember also that he is Robert, and if the wine and the whores and the laughter that made him sweet also made him weak enough to forget within a fortnight what he has written today." "And if he does not forget?" Tyrion asked. He was smiling with half his mouth and thinking with the other half. "Then we will remind him of what he has loved and lost and ask him to count how many things men can take from a man before he remembers he used to strike rather than count," Tywin said. "And we will put a boy in a castle to learn manners. And we will make a queen again from a woman who has been told to sit in a holdfast and wait. And we will sharpen knives." Tyrion drank and thought and made a little face as if the wine had gone to sour. "We could also try being virtuous," he said. "It is an experiment. Men praise experiments when they do not have to pay for them." Tywin's mouth did not move. His eyes made a small journey, as if to a window that had no light beyond it at present. "We will write the letter," he said. "Then you will go to the city. It seems Robert likes to put honest men in places where he has put asses before. He may yet need an honest dwarf." Tyrion's mouth made a round shape, as if he had been told he could have a second pastry if he would only eat the first in a way his father approved of. "Might I take a whore along?" he asked sweetly. "You may leave one behind if you wish," Tywin said. "Take your wits. They have been known to pay your debts." The day bled fully and the city woke itself in the rattle and crash and smell that had been the background to Robert's reign like a drumbeat he had sometimes danced to and sometimes tried to drown out. He dressed with less help than he once had needed and walked to the steps of the Red Keep with a sense that his feet were doing their proper work in the proper place for once. The small folk gathered as commanded, pourings of color that had faded under sun and washings brightening a little in this half-light. Fishwives with arms strong as any lord's, boys with their mouths open, men with scars that told of a life lived honestly, and men with the hiding eyes of those who have done things they would rather had been done by another. He spoke bread again first, because it is easier to speak of law to a man whose belly has stopped complaining for a day. He spoke as plainly as he could. He held up a loaf in his hand and broke it and passed it to a woman at the front, and she wept openly and then laughed at herself for weeping and then wept again, because it is a strange feeling to have a king hand you a piece of bread and feel that it may not be a trick. He spoke of the law next and did not name the boy and the girl and the other boy, because there were ears here that would be sharpened by that kind of gossip in a way he did not want. He said, "The man who sits after me will be the man who should sit there by the law and not by the cunning of a woman or the gold of a man who thinks his line is a god." He said, "I have been a poor king and will be a better one if you will let me." He said, "When you bring me your grievance, bring me your name too, and I will learn it if I can." He said, "If a gold cloak takes your coin and tells you it is the king's, find the one with a nail in his lip and tell him I sent you to him." He didn't shout. He did not make promises about dragons or summer lasting forever. He held up a loaf of bread again, and men cheered that, not him, and that was fine. At the edge of the crowd, a girl with hair the color of a crow's soaked wing put her fingers into the bread and broke a piece and then another and shared it with a boy who had no father and a woman who had had 3 and was tired of all that came of it. They did not know they had just been given a story they would tell later about a day when a king remembered to hold bread. They only knew they were chewing, and the salt on their tongues was not a tear. The day rolled forward as days must. Proclamations were posted. The lawmen stamped them with the right stamps. Men read them aloud to those who could not and added little jests of their own, because that is how men make hard words palatable. Cersei watched from behind a high window with her mouth tight and her hands easy on the sill, as if she had no care in the world. Joffrey pulled at the curtains and then sat down, angry and bored in equal measure. Tommen learned to move chessmen under an old knight's hand. He lost and learned to laugh quietly at his losses. Myrcella embroidered badly and grinned at her own mistakes and left them in because she liked the way they made the picture look a little like something had gone awry and then mended itself. At dusk, Robert walked again with Ned in the godswood that pretended to be a godswood, an insult of a place that had been built out of piety that cost gold rather than faith that cost blood. The trees were not old. Their leaves did not whisper secrets. The heart tree was a stump with a face that had been carved to frighten or to comfort in a hurry. He could not tell which. Ned touched it anyway, in that way he had that made all gestures honest by being so stubbornly simple. Robert watched a bird hop and make little sounds like coin struck too softly to be coin at all. "We will have to go to war," Ned said. "Not with lions only. With men who liked the boy better because the boy did not ask them for anything except to say yes." "I know," Robert said. He rubbed the scar through his shirt and winced as if it had been waiting to be acknowledged. "I will break. I will be broken. I will try to break as little that matters as I can." He had never been a man for prayer. He tried now and found it was a thing like drawing a bow after years of lifting only cups. It wobbled and the string cut his fingers, and the arrow went somewhere he could not see. He did it anyway, because he had stood before shadows and because sometimes a man must try even what he is clumsy at or be forever ashamed of his own neatness. That night, in a quiet room where the candles guttered and the shutters met just enough to keep out wind, a boy with a chain around his neck heavier than it needed to be brought Robert the book of lineages that had first cut this truth into Ned's eyes, and he opened it and saw black hair written down over and over again like a mantra the gods had grown bored of hearing men ignore. He smiled without humor and closed the book. He wanted to burn it. He wanted to make a fire that would blaze as the Red Woman liked to speak of. He wanted to piss on that fire. He wanted to sleep. He would do none of these things. He would rise in the morning and send letters and break bread and break men and be broken, and he would hold doors against shadows with his hands until such time as he could not hold them, and then he would hope his brothers would hold them for him if they had learned what he had tried to teach them by accident and now on purpose. On the black tooth of Dragonstone, a woman with hair like a cut thumb looked out to sea and smiled at the memory of a king who had put his hand on nothing and made it be something for a heartbeat. She did not fear him. She did not dismiss him either. She spoke a quiet name into the wind that had nothing to do with stags or lions, and the wind took it and showed it to the waves, who kept it. She turned from the sea and walked into a hall that had remembered dragons once and did not yet know if it would remember them again. Her feet were soundless on stone. The candles burned blue for a moment and then remembered how to be ordinary. In the west, a clever dwarf packed a bag and chose a book and a blade and a coin and a lie and decided he would see which one he needed first when he reached a city where kings remembered their names again. In the north, a boy with a wolf smiled in his sleep and then did not, because dreams are a cruel plenty and wolves know it. In a riverland meadow, the mountain's men laughed and did not see the iron come from the hedgerow until it took their front teeth and replaced them with failure. In a hot place across the sea, a girl with silver in her hair held an egg and wondered why it warmed under her hands when the night around her was cold. The sky had not yet learned to wear a red scar, but the seam was there, waiting. Robert slept briefly and badly and woke with his heart like a drum and the knowledge that the work he had set himself would not end until he did. He smiled into his beard and touched his belly and then his hammer because both belonged to him in truth. He stood and went to his door and opened it and found Barristan waiting without surprise, and Ned coming down the corridor with bread in his hand because he meant to eat and ride at the same time and save an hour for the realm, and Davos smelling of river and tar and already thinking in knots and tides, and Stannis with a face that said, "I have found men who will sail at my word," and Renly with a face that said, "I have learned to listen when a man who is not me speaks a thing worth hearing." He was not a good king. He did not expect to become one overnight. He closed his fingers around what he could hold, the morning, the men, the work, and walked into it as into rain. He had always been a man for weather. He would be a man for law for a time and for bread and for breaking. He would make those things fit in his hands, and if they didn't, he would strike with them anyway. He would continue until something struck back that he could not stand against. And even then he would try, if only to satisfy the boy who had once stood beside his brother counting the space between lightning and thunder and thinking there must be a way to put a hand between the two. On some nights, he would still dream of a boar, and on some he would dream of a shadow in the shape of a man's hand. On some he would dream of a girl laying flowers on a stone. He did not know yet what any of those dreams would make of him. He only knew that when he woke, there would be a loaf to break and a law to speak and a sword to keep in its sheath until the moment came when it must not be kept there anymore. And beyond the far lines of his knowing, the sea pressed and withdrew and pressed again, teaching the land its old lesson over and over. You are not the only thing that lasts. He found comfort in that. He put his weight down where he stood and felt, for the first time in years, that the floor was unlikely to tilt under him before he had finished saying the next necessary word. The morning came on like a bruise healing, colors rising under the skin of the sky until they settled into a livable blue. The city breathed. Ships rocked themselves awake at their moorings and snored canvas. Gulls wrote rude words on the air and were applauded by fishwives who had better ones. The Red Keep stretched and remembered that it had once been a fort and not a parlor. Robert took the stairs two at a time because walking like a king had always bored him. It did today as well, even with the old stitch tugging. He carried the ache the way a man carries a tool he'll need later, aware of its weight, unwilling to set it down for fear he'd forget it. Bywater's first sweeps bit into the watch like a plane shaving rough timber. Gold cloaks with two clean fingernails found themselves holding brooms on the street of silk and discovering that the stares of whores are worse than swords. Men who had learned the names of every barrel of bribe on the docks learned the names of ropes instead. Janos Slint vanished into the tangle of the city and then reappeared on a cart with 2 shirts and a cup and a sealed paper that said Night's Watch in a hand that would not be mistaken, Robert's. He did not look back as the cart rolled. He had learned that trick from men he had once admired and would never meet again. Robert watched from a balcony high enough that the gold of cloaks turned to yellow river water. He set his shoulders against the stone as if it were an old friend and said nothing. Ned came to him in mail with dust already on it. He had gone down to the yards before breakfast to see which men trod as if they knew they might die for the man on their left and which trod as if they were walking to a market. He had chosen the first with an eye that had not softened. He had found Beric Dondarrion in the crush and spoken to him, tall, handsome, with that mildew of inherited kindness growing in him despite weather, who had come from Blackhaven in storm-swept haste when the hand had sent before. Ned had wanted him in the van because he was the kind of man other men like to die behind, and that is a sad truth and a necessary one. Thuras of Myr had found them of his own accord in a smell of sour wine and old victories at tourney fires, and Ned had not sent him away. "I have no patience for your god," he had said without rancor. "But I'll take your sword and your courage and whatever tricks you think are just jests." Now he stood under Robert's gaze and said, "We ride within the hour. You will not chase Gregor into ruin," Robert said, which sounded like a jest until one remembered that many honest men had done just that and found nothing at the end but their own blood. "You will bring back his head if you can, his name if you cannot. Give my name to every burned hamlet and ask for bread in it. They will give it. They have not refused me bread yet, even when they should have." Ned nodded, the ease of comradeship underneath and years like armor over it. "If the mountain runs to his master, I will see which way the horse's head points. I will not take the riverlands from Hostertully's hands. I will put a knife in the hand he offers me and tell him to use it." "Good," Robert said. "Bring me back something that feels like the beginning of an end. I am tired of middles." His hand fell, briefly, to Ned's wrist and squeezed. "Come back." Ned's mouth made that little crook it made when he did not wish to say a thing out loud for fear it would embarrass both of them. "I will if the gods allow it," he said, and Robert grunted as if at a feeble joke and then watched him go. On the river a little later, Davos Seaworth stood on a plank with tar soaked into it and watched men argue about the price of their oars. He remembered being a boy who could count his ribs easier than his coppers and thought, not without wonder, that he had come to a point where he could lean on a reckoning and it would lean back. He had found the master of the king's ships and told him, "Your title and your anchors have not been used properly. Air them." He had found, to his amusement, that the man had the decency to blush. He spoke to shipwrights along the Blackwater's bank and did not promise them what couldn't be delivered. He promised coin for timbers cut straight and for tar not watered, and then he saw to it the coin came. He sent boys downriver to find the low-built Lysini raiders who hovered like gulls beyond law but within custom. He had them ask after Salador San and his flotilla of boasts. When San came, he came with a smile that had paid his way through tighter harbors than this. Davos met him on a quay where the river's breath was busy and said, "No tricks. The king pays, you row. The king's badge on your mast. You keep your lies for your own table." San spread his hands. "Your king and my king have not always been the same man, Onion Knight. But I have loved your king, what is the word? Philosophically, from a distance. He does not haggle. He either throws coins or tables. I admire that. I will take his coin this week. I will row." "You will row for Stannis when he says so," Davos said, as if correcting a boy at his letters. "And for the king when he says so. I'll have no Lysini printing their own coin with a god on the back. I have had enough of gods." San laughed delightedly. "Ah, you are a very good priest of no god. I wish all priests were like you." But he put his mark where Davos's ragged nail pointed, and his men took the king's badge, and the river remembered how to look like a place where fleets are born. In Maegor's holdfast, shadows collected on the undersides of tapestries like dust and made the women sneeze. Cersei did not sneeze. She had perfected the art of breathing in rooms where dust should have choked her. She sat without sitting, perched and coiled at once, and listened to Pycelle empty his cupboard of explanations for why the law meant something else when spoken in Latin. Lancel hovered with a tray, misreading every shift of her shoulders as an instruction, eager and doomed because eagerness in boys always is. Myrcella stitched with care and accident both and pretended not to hear the words that slid below her mother's tone. "He will forget," Pycelle wheezed, and each syllable came wrapped in phlegm. "His Grace has remembered the severity of his youth for a moment. He will not maintain the vigor of his pronouncements. If we are patient." "If I hear the word patient again," Cersei said, soft and plain, "I will make you swallow the chain you clank about as if you were a dog that had found a night's meat. Leave me." Pycelle left in slow, outraged grace. as if the insult were part of the ritual and not the point of it. Lancel shifted. "My lady," he said, and Cersei looked at him until he flushed because looking at him was the easiest exercise she had left. "You will go find me men," she said. "Men who will do as they are told without caring if a song is made of it. Find me 3 brothers who have spent their lives selling their swords one at a time and are ready to sell them together. Find me a priest who drinks as much as a knight and who lights his sword on fire for show and who believes nothing until it happens. Find me a jailer who is tired of seeing coins pass his door. Bring them to me one by one. I will decide which I like for which need." Lancel nodded as if told to fetch cushions. In his face, she saw the space where a man would be one day and the hollowness that would remain when the boy had gone. She had once thought such spaces could be filled by will alone. Now she thought of filling them with oil and a match. In the yard where men drilled, Renly watched Loras tilt at a Quinton and strike it well and then strike it badly because his mind had leapt ahead to the moment after the blow and forgotten the blow itself. He loved him for both. He felt Marjorie come up beside him without needing to see her. She smelled of clean wool and a little lavender. The scent sat on the air lightly as good manners. "He is angry on my behalf," Renly said. "He thinks anger is a garment and loyalty the clasp." "He will learn," Marjorie said. There was no cruelty in it. She slipped her hand into his and left it there, unhidden, because the court had eyes and mouths and she wanted theirs to be occupied. "You will teach him when to wear which. I will teach him when to change them." "He sent me a crown last night," Renly said, and his mouth twisted because his humor had not deserted him, only grown teeth. "I have set it in a coffer for later. I am learning to plan for later. It is a new art. I have been very good at now." "Now is a child," Marjorie said. "It is petulant and honest and greedy and sometimes worth all the trouble. Later is a husband. He keeps accounts. He expects you to come home." He laughed, quietly, and let his shoulder find hers because it steadied him. "The city suits me," he said. "It makes me say better things. The air is thick with lies, and so a lie must be well made to be worn in it without chafing. Stannis will be king after Robert. I must decide what I will be that will make me bearable to myself." "Beloved," she said lightly, "you are usually that. Be useful instead. Men forgive usefulness even when they cannot love it." On Dragonstone, the wind had a taste of iron filings and old vows. Stannis stood before a cold hearth and did not light it because a fire lit out of habit is worse than no fire at all. Celis moved through the chamber with her eyes cast down so thoroughly that she had learned to see the floor better than men who lifted their gaze. Her lips moved now and then. If any god heard her, it was likely not the one she had chosen. Alistair Florent came with parchment smelling of his own consequence and spoke in a voice that could lecture a wall and make it blush. "The Queen has been confined to Maegor's Holdfast," he said. "In that way men have of beginning a story with the wrong detail." "The boy has." "Stop calling him king," Stannis said. "You call him boy to me. Call him king to a woman who needs comfort." He walked to the window, which offered a view of something that was neither sea nor sky but a forged alloy of the two. "Robert has ordered Our Lady Melisandre from my camp." Celis' mouth made the shape of a wound. "He sets his hand against the light. He sets his hand against witchcraft that moves intense at night," Stannis said. "He does not know that sometimes the world shakes and light falls out of the cracks without a witch anywhere in sight." He did not look at Celis because he had learned that if he looked at her while criticizing her god, he would be moved to cruelty against a woman rather than against a notion. He preferred his cruelties as clean as he could make them. "I will send ships to the city. I have named to them their wages. We will bring the fleet round the scorched cape when the wind remembers itself." Alistair cleared his throat. "And the matter of the boy Edric at Storm's End." Stannis' face made an old shape. "My brother has always been generous with his seed and profligate with his name," he said. "The boy is under Ser Courtenay's care. I will not take him from a castle that has kept him straight to put him in a place where men will so much as count the color of his hair. I will have the boy later when later needs him. For now I will have ships." Celis' rosary clicked like insects. The statue of the mother still stands in the September. The smiths work with their old prayers. "Let them," Stannis said, the words like flung nails. "When a thing needs to be burned for use, we will burn it. Not one fig before." Downriver and west, the riverlands opened like a book left out in weather. Pages wrinkled, ink bled, names washed awry. Ned Stark rode with banners that had learned the trick of flapping under rain without looking ridiculous. He had Beric Dondarrion at his right and Thuras of Myr behind with his sword wrapped in oiled cloth, because some men learn wisdom in age and some need to be told 6 times and some never learn. Thuras had been 2 of those and was trying the 3rd. A dozen other good men rode, the Manderly loyal, a piper boy with freckles like spilled spice and a laugh that came even now, Harwin with Winterfell in his seat and the city in his eyes and a hunger to reconcile them, a Blackwood bastard with a raven feather braided in his hair. They passed small holds that had been shaved by fire to smoothness and smelled ashen pig, and sometimes the interest of wolves who had come late to a feast. At a ford with stones that had heard too much shouting, they found the mountain spoor. Big hooves not shod properly because whoever had shod them had done it to make speed, not kindness. Prints of men who had learned to run with sacks. The place where embers had been kicked to look like accident. Ned put himself in the water and let the cold make him honest. He thought of Jory at this ford, or one like it, laughing, going down with a splashing shock, spitting water, then pretending it had been a plot. He swallowed the images in the way of men who have not the time for them. They found the mountain 2 days later, or rather, he found them. He came out of a copse with men in front as if he were a mill and they were flour. The banners he did carry were ragged and had been washed in blood more than once. The ones he did not carry hung invisible and were clearer Lannister pay, Lannister ways. He was huge as the stories said, and perhaps more. He had the look of a man who bred his horses like himself, large and ill-tempered and sound in the wrong ways. He did not shout. He rode at them as if riding through fog. "Gregor Clegane," Ned said calmly, "you are summoned to King's Landing to answer for the burning of Lord Tully's lands and the killing of men who owed him bread and peace. You will come. If you do not, I will make something of what is left of you to send to the king in your stead." The mountain turned his head slightly as if a fly had spoken. "The hand," he said, and one could not tell if it were a greeting or a diagnosis. "You are far from your chair. I am on my way to King's Landing now." "Then we will accompany you," Ned said. "We will keep you from losing your way." Gregor smiled, and the ruin it made of his face reminded Thuras of a tavern he had once burned by accident. "You will not keep me from anything," he said, and put spurs to his horse, and the air turned to iron. The first clash was fast and without poetry. Men who had made jests over bread found their mouths full of metal and their hands busy. Beric met a man with a boar's head on his shield and unhorsed him with a neat turn that would have won a lady's favor in more civilized ground. The man came up like a boar and gored him with a broken spear before he could call it a fair bout. Harwin took a slash at a man's arm and made him drop his axe, and then kicked him in the knee to make him drop his pride. He thought of Winterfell for the first time in days and felt guilty for the warm feeling. The piper boy laughed when he should have been praying just because a lance had broken clean, and that surprised him. Then a hammer took his laugh out of his mouth and he fell with his eyes still smiling. Thuras wrapped his swordcloth away and lit the blade with a plain torch because he liked the look of it, and because men sometimes break when they see fire even if they have been taught better by food and hearth. He charged like a drunk the gods had picked up and set straight for a laugh. He met the mountain second and cut him across the face so cleanly the man's own blood seemed to hesitate before believing the story it was being told. Then the mountain himself was there as a cliff appears when a man turns in water, and Thuras found himself absurdly remembering a time he had tried to ride a bull in Volantis because a woman had laughed and dared him. Beric fought near Thuras and shouted something like a psalm and something like a curse and took a lance through his side as if it were a question asked too bluntly. He fell, he rose, he fell again and did not. Men closed around him and fought over his body because men always do that if they love a man enough or hate him sufficiently or cannot tell the difference. Ned saw the mountain and went toward him as a needle toward a magnet. He did not think of himself as brave when he did this. He thought of duty like a belt he had buckled in the morning without looking. Gregor saw him and smiled again. Their horses met and learned about each other and did not like what they learned. Ned's sword rang against Gregor's, and the shock of it ran into his shoulder and woke an old ache that had nothing to do with Jaime Lannister and everything to do with weather. Gregor's second cut like dull saw teeth. Ned's third was a line that men in Winterfell had been born learning. Then an arrow, loosed at a guess by a frightened boy, clattered off Ned's pauldron and stole the breath meant for his next strike. Gregor took it. The world narrowed for a blink and then widened around pain. Ned did not fall. He backed 2 steps because he wanted to, not because he had to. He had men between the mountain and his life in the space of a heartbeat. Harwin and the Blackwood bastard and a Manderly who panted like a bellows and sweated like a kitchen. Beric lay where he had fallen. Thuras found him. He fell to his knees without theater and touched the man's chest and felt the longbowman's feathered shaft where it had gone in and found the life's heat departing as if a door had been opened. The Red Priest made a sound he had not made in years. It was not a prayer to any god men would gossip about. It was the sound a man makes when the drink leaves him long enough to remember that he loves something more than drink. "Not yet," he said, in a voice like a horse refusing a fence. He put his hands on Beric's breast, and men fighting around them made a strange, small space because something in them recognized the sound of a thing that might be a miracle or a foolishness about to get someone else killed. Thuras spoke words he had mumbled 1,000 times at fairs when he lit his sword and the crowd wanted to be told that the fire meant something more than entertainment. He put his mouth near Beric's ear and told him to come back for bread and for a dead A&D because a woman had smiled at him once with one tooth crooked and he had thought that all crookedness could be lovely. Beric's chest rose as if a hand under it had decided to make a puppet of him. His mouth opened. Air rusted in. Thuras sat back with tears in his beard and wiped them as if embarrassed. "Up," he said roughly. "Up, you fool." Beric's eyes came open slow as a dawn after a storm, sticky and new. He looked at Thuras and then at the sky and then at the fight still going on as if nothing important had happened. "You are uglier than I remember," he said hoarsely, and Thuras laughed like a man who believed in a god and had had proof and didn't like it. Down the line, the mountain felt something. Men like him always do, a change, a pull, a small betrayal in the balance of the day, and decided that what could not be done cleanly could be done messily another time. He made a gesture, and his men pulled back with the crabbed grace of thieves, cutting throats that would slow pursuit and taking anything that glittered in sunlight with them. Ned wanted to chase. Every piece of him that had been forged to say no to his wants said no, and he did not. He put men to tending other men and saw to it that the dead were called by their names at least once by someone who could say the names without mocking them. When he rode back into the dusk to a water meadow where men had set fires like candles, he was gray around the mouth and the blood on his sleeve had dried to a color like old wine. Thuras came to him with eyes still wide from whatever had moved through them and said, "I do not know what I have done. You have complicated my life," Ned said. And because he is not a cruel man, he put his hand on Thuras's shoulder and squeezed. "Thank you. Keep him. I will need him again." In King's Landing, Robert stood with Varys and watched the city the way a butcher watches a pen of pigs, counting, noticing which might break a fence, admiring the thickness of a haunch. Varys spoke in his careful way about letters that had been intercepted and letters that had not because to intercept them would have told the writer too much. Littlefinger spoke later in a different room about coins that could be found when none had been placed on a shelf and men who would believe there were 2 coins if you showed them one and turned it twice. Robert nodded to both as to 2 parts of a song he did not intend to hum long. 11 carts of grain were turned toward the city that had been bound for Casterly Rock, Littlefinger said, with a conspirator's smile meant to flatter. "They are yours now. Bread breathes differently tonight." "Good," Robert said. "You will forgive me if I do not praise you for unstabbing men you had a hand in stabbing. I will praise you if you keep your hands where they can be seen." He yawned like a dog. "Tell your friends the coin will come from honest places for a month. After that, tell them it will come from them." "Honesty is an expensive vintage," Littlefinger murmured. "I am delighted to see you have acquired a taste for it." Varys sighed as if the air itself had disappointed him but was trying to make it right. "Lord Tywin writes from the Golden Tooth," he said. "He has told his mountain to come and tell the king himself that he is not in his employ. In doing so, he admits that he can call him. It is the sort of letter wise men keep and liars regret." "He sends his whelp," Robert said. "He will send one clever one, small enough to pass where he cannot without breaking the walls. He will hope I will like him enough not to break his father. Perhaps I will like him. I have liked men I should have hanged." "Half men are easier to like," Varys said, with a smirk he did not allow to reach the corner of his mouth. "They take up less space." "Send him to me when he comes," Robert said. He put his hand on the window's stone and felt the night creep in through it, old and damp. "I want to see what a Lannister looks like when he expects to be greeted with something other than fear or flattery." At the Lion Gate, a day later, a small man in a good cloak rode with men whose faces said they had eaten better since they met him. He had a sellsword with him who looked as if he had discovered an honest trade in dishonesty and liked it fine, and 3 mountain men who wore their pride like disease. He saw the city and smiled the way men do when they encounter a puzzle with a missing piece and realize the missing piece is their own. In Maegor's Holdfast, Sansa sat by a window that thought well of itself and tried to stitch a stag that did not look like a dog with horns. She had learned to make her hands move as if her mind were calm. She still liked to pretend that if she did things the way queens do, she would become one. Arya would have laughed. Arya would have given the stag a tongue out and eyes like a madman and then thrown the cloth away to go find the yard. Arya had a Braavosi for a teacher and a book of water under her skin now. Sansa had a different kind of teacher entirely. When Myrcella came to sit with her, Sansa smiled and made room for the lamp between them. They bent their heads together and did not speak much. There are friendships that grow from words. Theirs at that moment grew from the refusal to use any. "Will your father die?" Myrcella asked after a long quiet, because she was a princess and had been taught to be plain when it was required. Mothers say, when they don't want to say anything else. "He won't," Sansa said. "I think he almost did then. I think he decided not to." She touched the crooked antler and laughed and did not apologize. "He told the truth in the hall. It was like watching a man I had seen under armor walk into a room with no armor and be braver than before." "I like your father," Myrcella said softly. "He looked at me as if I were a person and not a jewel." She blushed because she liked jewels. "We will both be jewels and persons," Sansa said, grand and absurd and entirely serious. "We will decide when to be which." In the Godswood that was not a wood, Ned returned by raven before his horse could, sending ahead a thin report that did not boast and did not hide, the way northern things are written. Robert read the neat hand that was not Ned's, understood the words under the words, and went to the sept to stand in a place where the gods he had never loved could look at him if they wished. He looked at the 7-faced thing and tried to pick the one that would forgive him for pleasures he would not apologize for and for cruelties he had yet to commit but might need to. He settled on the stranger and grinned into its stone, because it seemed most honest to grin at the only god who liked to walk the halls of men unannounced. He turned, and Thuras was at the door, smelling faintly of ashen horse and something else, something like a blown-out candle. "Your man breathes again," the priest said, wonder and fear running together like 2 wines carefully poured. "I told him to. I do not know why he listened." "Perhaps he is obedient," Robert said. "Few men are." He clapped Thuras's shoulder and felt the heat in it that was not fever and not drink. "Do not light swords at my tables. Light them where I tell you to and not unless the night comes in with a hand. The last shadow that tried to take my brother found me in its way. If it returns, I will be in its way again. If you have tricks other than to make boys clap, keep them for that night." Thuras bowed as one drunk to another, solemn with a seriousness that made the gesture not ridiculous. He said, "a man can learn the difference between a fair trick and a foul miracle." Summer hung on, resentful and sticky, as if not yet ready to concede to the rumors of winter whispered by men who watched the wall and sent ravens to people who would only half read them. The city's nights held storms in them that did not break. The court simmered like a stew that had been kept just this side of boiling for hours. Robert stood within it and did not drink as much as he could have and did not touch as much as he had, and found that both choices gave him a headache different from wines and better. On the day Tyrion Lannister presented himself in the throne room, he did so with a bow too deep to be taken seriously and words too plain to be dismissed. "Your Grace," he said, and let the be just sharp enough to make a note of caution in it. "My Lord Father sends his regard and his purse and his excuses. He may keep the second and the third," Robert said. "His regard I will stew for later." He walked down the steps because he had never liked the view from above. He stopped one stare up from Tyrion and looked into a face that had been made a jest and had learned to make jests back sharper. "You are not Janos Slynt," Robert said. "Good beginning. Are you a liar?" "Less than most men," Tyrion said, and his smile said, "Depending on the time of day." "Good," Robert said again. "I need a man who can tell me what my enemies will do and then tell me what my friends will do. Then perhaps I shall learn the difference." Tyrion tipped his head, as if feeling the weight of a feather there and finding it balanced. "If I tell you something you do not wish to hear, will you have me thrown into the river?" "I will have you given a towel," Robert said. "And the next time, a boat." Tyrion's eyes glittered. "Then allow me to begin," he said. "Your bread wins you a week. Your truth wins you a fortnight. Your brothers win you a winter if they can be kept from instructing each other. Your queen will be quiet until it hurts her to be quiet. My Lord Father will be still until he sees whether he should be a wall or a storm. I'll go to speak to the small men who think they are large and the large men who think they are small and the ones who are properly sized, and I will tell them that the king has remembered what a king is supposed to be. They will say that they like it. They will wait to see if it sticks." Robert grinned despite himself. "I like you less than I should," he said. "I will like you more when you make trouble for your father." "Oh," Tyrion said, with that odd gravity that made his wit heavier rather than lighter. "I was born to." In the night that came after, Robert woke with his heart thumping as if it had taken up a project of its own. He swung his legs out of bed and stood, and the ache in his belly reminded him of himself in the most honest way possible. He went to the window and opened it and let the city talk to him. Somewhere below, two cats were trying to decide whether to fight or mate. Somewhere else, a baby made that gremlin noise babies make when they are about to forget to cry and then remember. Far off, the river murmured like an old wife. The sea beyond the river could not be heard but could be felt in the wind's salt and the stones cool. There would be wars yet. He had bought a night and then a week and then perhaps a winter if the gods had a sense of theater. He would be asked to pay for each and would pay out of coin he had not yet minted. Blood, laughter, mercy, wrath. He would spend more of himself than he had hoarded. He might be found at the bottom of himself and see if there were anything worth seeing there. He leaned his forehead against the cool of the stone and closed his eyes and saw not a throne of swords but the kitchen table at Storm's End where a boy had once put his heels on the rung and been smacked for it by a woman with flour on her hands. He saw Renly's bare head under rain, the crown on a table like a game left mid-play. He saw Stannis' eyes like flint, good for a spark if you were patient and had tinder. He saw Ned's hands that had held winter like a tool and made something of it that men could live in. He saw a shadow grow a hand and then lose it when it tried to take something that belonged to him. He saw bread broken without partition, not for display. He smiled, not to be seen by anyone but himself, and whispered a thing like a vow to no one at all. In the morning, he put one foot in front of the other. The realm, contrary to song, is a thing you carry plain as a bucket. It slops, it spills, it wets your boots and sweetens your tongue and stinks, by turns. So he carried it, and when his arms ached, he shifted it to the other hand and went on, while far away, winter gathered itself like a cloak yet to be thrown, and men shivered not because they were cold but because memory is a kind of weather as well, and it had begun to change. The day had the smell of steel in it, as if someone somewhere were scrubbing armor with sand. Tyrion Lannister spent the morning walking the lower city in a cloak that cost less than his boots, with Bronn drifting 3 steps behind like a shadow that had quit pretending to be anything else, and 3 mountain men loping with that animal economy as if they could smell grass under stone. He made a map with his eyes. He marked where Bywater's men had replaced Slint's with the restraint of men who did not think their baton was a scepter. He marked where bakers had put out loaves in pairs and where they had put them out one by one. He marked where men laughed with their mouths and where they laughed in their throats, which was always the better sign of contentment, since men who laugh in their throats do not expect to be overheard. He came back to the red keep with dust on his boots and grapes in his pocket that he had bought rather than stolen because theft tastes sour even to those who like sour, and found Varys already waiting in the antechamber to the small council as if he had been summoned by the thought of a conference. Varys smelled very lightly, as always, of powder that clothed the body in a fiction. Tyrion smelled of city and horse. Their smiles met, bowed to one another, and stepped aside like men of equal rank who have decided to share a corridor rather than test it. "You have taken the city's pulse," Varys murmured. "I have taken the city's purse," Tyrion said. "It is emptier than I like, fuller than it could be. Men are waiting to see if the king continues making the kind of sense that stings. They are ready to forgive him for it because he handed them bread. Bread is the only argument that speaks every language. And law?" Varys asked, innocent. "Law is bread the morning after," Tyrion said. "It is eaten without appetite and keeps a man on his feet all day. The city will eat it if it must." He turned at the sound of boots and watched Bywater come in with dust on his cloak and a nail in his lip, as if he had put it there to remind his mouth to be practical. "One of the king's better choices," Tyrion added under his breath. Bywater saluted with utility rather than flourish. "Your Grace wants a plain report," he said when Robert came in and did not sit. "There were 5 fights over loaves. 3 were settled with stick, 2 with hand. No blood. 2 merchants complained of the price posted. 1 confessed under question to having salted his grain to make it weigh more. He will pay the city what he took from it and sell nothing for a week. The granaries will be empty by the next market day unless you choose to use the reserves on Visenya's hill." "Use them," Robert said, "and send men to buy more east of Rosby. Tell them to pay with coin and with the king's name. If a man tries to keep his grain back for later profit, have him eat it dry." His eyes skimmed over Varys and fixed a moment on Tyrion as if testing the feel of him in the room. "You smell of the truth. What else?" "Your wife will crack only in private," Tyrion said, all silk in his voice with the steel tucked well under. "She will not take the city by storm with a tantrum. She will look for seams to pry. She is writing letters with a hand that never tires. My Lord Father writes in return. Smooth words, a ship for the city, and a promise that the mountain was hunting boar and stumbled over a village he mistook for a pig. He will send me to say this with a face he hopes you will prefer to break bread with rather than break." Robert grunted. "I prefer faces that don't make me think of mines. Your father's face always made me think of men who had been made to dig until they learned to love the dark." He flicked a glance at Varys. "Where does he sit?" "Golden Tooth," Varys sang. "He has pulled in his men from Derry's boundaries and pretends they were never there. He feeds them in a way that makes the Riverlands suspect their own eyes. He waits." "He can wait," Robert said. "He'll find the chair warmer when he sits if he's patient. I will make sure the fire that warms it is mine." He dismissed them with a wave and went to find quieter work, which was to say harder. The thing he had avoided since he had ridden into his own hall waited for him in a courtyard behind the armory where the heat was honest and the sound of the hammer strong enough to beat back thoughts if you let it. The smell of oil and iron pulled up old feelings like buckets from a well. He stood in the doorway a moment to let his eyes change, and then went among the anvils like a man going back into an orchard to look for a fruit he had once juggled badly and never eaten properly. Tobo Mott bowed the way a craftsman bows, to the work, not the man. Robert liked him for that, and liked the way the man's sleeves were burned and pocked with things he did not have time to pick out of them. Boy apprentices looked sideways and then remembered themselves and banged too hard on something thin. Robert moved slowly so as not to jar them. "There was a lad," he said at last to Tobo. after they had talked about a new hinge for a gate and a new way of quenching that the master had learned from a man who had learned it from another man. Brown-haired, strong arms. He looked at me once like a hammer looks at a nail, and I liked him for it. Where is he? Tobo lifted his chin the way he did when he had to tell a man that the work he wanted done would be expensive and then would be worth it. The gold cloaks took him away, he said. Months ago, on a day when the Hand's men came looking for another boy entirely. I believe they meant to ask him questions. I believe their questions were swords and their answers were the same. I told a man who asked me yesterday where he had gone, and he wrote a note I did not read. Robert turned his head very slightly. He did not like the feeling of the old life returning by the wrong door. Find the man who took him, he said to Bywater, who had followed because that's what a good guard does. Follows elbow, not shoulder. If the boy breathes, bring him to a place where I can see him. If he does not breathe, bring me the names of the men who kept him from it. Bring me the name of the man who asked the question with a note yesterday. Bywater's nail moved with his lip in an expression a more polished captain would have disguised. "Aye, your grace," Tobo said, boldness like heat making his words straight. He was a good boy. He made a copper look like bronze. He did not steal. It is a rarity in a boy with those shoulders. There are some things I cannot fix, Robert said. There are some I can. I'll take a hammer to the ones I can reach. Keep your sleeves blackened. It makes me trust you. He left with grief like grit behind his teeth and went to meet Stannis, who had come back from the lists of shipwrights with his jaw set in the line that meant he had found reason to be angrier at himself than at other men. They met in a room with windows that looked east to where the river broke itself against the city's piers, because Robert wanted his brother to remember that he was heir to a realm with a tide in it as much as to a chair. "I have 20 ships ready to show you," Stannis said, haut greeting that a courtier would have recognized as such. 10 more could be had for coin that ought to be spent on roads, since no man rides everywhere by water and the sea does not pay tolls. If you insist, I will spend it. I will hate it. You may hate it, Robert said. I have wasted more coin than you have counted. I will count now. Bend it. Sailors eat better when there is war. Let them eat a little before it. I have seen Davos talking to pirates, Stannis went on, because when he had a choice about subjects, he picked the most difficult to be rid of. He calls them by name and they answer him as if he were a cousin at a wake. It is useful. I find it distasteful. I have not stopped it because it is useful. Good, Robert said. I am glad to learn that disgust does not overmatch sense in you. His mouth softened and he saw Stannis recognize as much without letting his face admit to any emotion beyond a lowering of the fire in his eyes. I sent the Red Woman away, Robert added. I know you will bring her back if you can find a reason I cannot counter. For a while you will not find it. Use this while. Stannis's hands, always a little too large for the gloves men made, tightened and then uncurled. I will be king-in-law after you, he said, as if forcing a diet on himself. Renly will be charming in your court until he can be charming in his own hall when you are not looking. I will be a bridge you have built under men who do not wish bridges existed. I will not bend under them. If I do, I will break and it will be simple. You might surprise yourself, Robert said. Bridges do not always carry only weight. Sometimes they carry music. Let the men sing on yours, once in a while, and they will not notice how narrow it is. He reached across the table and took his brother by the forearm with a grip that said, I have not forgotten. For a heartbeat, he felt Stannis give him his weight like a man learning to trust ice. Renly, Stannis said, and that one name carried a childhood of tug and bait, pride and ache, has sent bread to the barracks on the Visenya side without telling you. I noticed, Robert said. He has sent it with a note in each sack that smells like apples. It says nothing and says this. My crown is in a coffer, not in a fire. I am not ungrateful. I will not be beholden to him for bread, Stannis replied stiff. You will be beholden to the realm, Robert said, which is bread. That is all. He stood because he always felt words lay better when he spent some of them on his feet. Walk with me, We will go look at ships we cannot yet fill and men we will later. We will then walk to the sept to stand and be bored while a priest tells the gods we still remember the names our fathers liked. It will do us good." Ned's raven came into the council as they were making to leave, as if it had smelled a pause in which it could be heard. Its feet had dust on them from roads that had not been wet since the day before. Varys took the tube from its leg with hands practiced at taking things from those who might bite. He broke the seal with that neat little sound that makes some men feel they have just opened a fortune and others a wound. He read and handed it to Robert, who read slower and with lips that moved a little when he did sums of men's lives in his head. "Beric Dondarrion breathes," Robert said aloud. "He had no right to. He does. Thuras did a thing with a mouth and a fear and a trick that was not a trick. The mountain runs. Ned will not chase until the men who have fallen are set with names. He says to tell the city to go on being brave with its bread. He tells me to tell you he will bring me something shaped like justice by week's end." "Thuras," Stannis said dry, as if the name were a joke and a confession both. "Do not let him and your onions spend too much time together. They will make you believe in something you will have to pay for later." "I already believe in bread," Robert said. "I am paying. The bill is high. I have made worse purchases than this." They did the slow, grateful work of the day like men turning a spit, with patience, with a rhythm that kept the cooks from swearing, with a readiness to move when fat dripped faster than expected and flames ran up. In the evening, Renly came to supper with his hair damp and a scent of lavender that had come by way of a woman's hand rather than a boy's. He sat with Robert, not opposite him, and that said as much as any words they exchanged. Loras hovered and glowed, and each time Robert's eye caught him, the boy's expression shifted like a slice of sea under different light. Pride, joy, wariness, that clean, foolish love that makes boys brave and stupid at once. Marjorie laughed at something Barristan said that was not meant to be a jest but could be taken as one. Robert began to like her in the way you do someone who knows how to take advantage of a thing without making you feel the thing is less for it. After they had eaten enough to call it eating and not more, Robert walked out with Renly and they stood at a parapet while the city breathed damp against the stone. "I will need you to go to High Garden," Robert said without turning his head. "Soon. You will carry a letter that says, 'My brother has been told he is heir-in-law, and the realm will not be a field for gardeners to plant crowns in.' You will carry another that says, 'Send me your grain and your men for boats, and I will send you a song that is honest about how you saved my city.'" Renly let air out of his nose in a sound that wanted to be a laugh and failed because it had already spent itself being glad that the Red Woman had been put on a ship. "Marjorie would like to carry those letters," he said. "She would be believed if she read them aloud. Mace will puff and pretend and then sign for the pleasure of seeing his name beside yours. My grandmother will send you back a tart with a razor in it and a lesson. I would like to be there to watch." "Then go," Robert said. "Leave your crown if it makes your head heavy. Take it if it makes you stand taller. But remember, if you hold it up to the light too often, men will count the flaws and whisper them aloud." Renly's hand found Robert's shoulder as if by accident. It squeezed with a pressure that confessed more than any word and then removed itself before the moment could be counted against either of them as weakness. "You are being the man we thought you were," he said. "I am being the man I was and am," Robert replied. "I do not know if that is enough." They parted with the sort of brevity brothers strive for when they mean to say more another time and fear the gods will overhear and punish them for showing their hearts. Beyond the city, where roads made choices for men and men pretended otherwise, Ned Stark took his smaller company and left Beric to gather the ragged decent. Men who had felt the mountain and meant to make a brotherhood of being wronged. Thuras stayed with Beric, because he was both shamed and not ashamed by what he had done, and because the miracle had run just far enough into him to make him want to see where it would run next. Ned took Harwin and the Blackwood Bastard and a dozen others and rode in a way that saved the horses rather than lords' tempers. He followed stories. Stories were better than tracks when men wanted to disappear. Stories, when collected with patience, make a rope. They found a place where 3 bodies had been left hanging from a tree and someone had climbed and cut them down before the birds could take their eyes. A woman with bread-stained hands told Ned their names and how they had laughed when they were boys. She did not say what they had done as men. She did not think it mattered. Ned agreed, aloud and inwardly both, and gave her a silver for each name that she could use to buy bread instead of grief. They found a stream where the water was rouged with mud and male blood and the drift of something that had once been a cart. They found a boy who had taken a cut to the belly and had not spilled his life because it had found a way to climb higher than the cut. He taught Ned a new curse he had invented just for men with Lannister colors. Ned did not scold him. They found the mountain's new camp in a stand of alders with ground turned to soup by the many feet that had churned it. He had not meant to make it easy. The land and the indifference of men who carry evil lightly had done so for him. Ned had no fancy for banners that day. He waited until the sun had pulled away a little of its heat, and then he sent a man to the edge with a simple word: parley. Gregor rode out as if he were riding to a wedding. He had a smile like a splinter. Jaime Lannister rode with him, not smiling, looking at Ned with that cat's attention that makes both mice and men unsettled. They reined their horses where the ground had learned to be firm again after River and Hoof had argued. Ned came with two, a measure of trust that in truth measured disgust. "You are wrong to smile," Ned said to the mountain. "You should have no teeth." Gregor's smile remained. "You took a blow that should have made you pray," he said. "It did not. I admire that. I have been told to admire some things in my time. I did not expect to admire that." Jaime's mouth twitched. "He admires the way a butcher does, Stark," he said lightly. "He admires a pig that keeps walking after its throat is cut." Ned did not smile. "I know where to put my knife," he said. "I do not intend to put it there today." "We go to King's Landing," the mountain said, bored. "The king has sent for me. He will hear me. I will tell him you wronged me. I will tell him I wronged no one." "You will tell him you wronged no one," Ned repeated, and the line of his jaw made the idea seem as ridiculous as it was. "We will ride with you. If your men lift a blade against a farmer, we will lift a head. If you enter a village, you will enter it on your knees. If you put your hand to a loaf you have not paid for, I will take the hand. Tell that to your men. We are done with careless." Jaime Lannister looked east. He looked back at Ned with something like real curiosity, a flicker that took his face from icon into man and then back again. "The king is different," he said. "He is what he was when he was not king," Ned said. "Sometimes that is enough." He had a sudden, painful picture of Robert as a boy with hair like a storm and laughter that had made dormitory rafters shake, and he put it away not because it hurt but because it helped, and he needed to put his feet on this ground, not those boards. They rode in a lumpy convoy that made a mess of the summer roads. Ned took to riding behind the mountain where he could see how the great brute's back told stories the way men's faces do. Scars kissed by feasts of careless ale, new anger sown into old habit, that impatient hunch of a man who had learned long ago to expect no punishment that mattered. Jaime drifted to Ned's side when he could, and their words were thin and sharp as the edge of a blade laid on a nail to test its truth. "You will find my sister in a mood," Jaime said. "It will please you and then it will not." "I do not take pleasure in some kinds of pain," Ned replied. "You have poor taste," Jaime said easily, and then, because the part of him that was still a boy could not help itself, "I did not kill your friend in the street intending him to die." "I know what you intended," Ned said. "Men are not often taller than their intentions." They came to a hamlet and Ned reined up and spoke in a carrying voice without shouting. "You will pass this place with eyes down. You will not make jests. You will not piss on the wall. If you do, I will see to it you use your other hand to do it next time." Men laughed because they were men, and then they did as they were told because there are voices that do not use their volume to make themselves obeyed. The mountain's eyes slid to Ned and slid away again. Jaime laughed into his glove. The woman with the cow did not understand who had spared her fence a piss, but understood that something had shifted and smiled into her bucket. Later she would tell the story with more blood and more grace in it, as all good stories acquire. Word ran ahead of them as it must. When they came within sight of the walls, the city had already decided how to receive them. Bywater's gold cloaks made a straight line with no gap in it. They did not show teeth. Jacelyn himself sat his horse as if it had been a chair that belonged to him, not a throne he had stolen. Robert stood on a low platform where the last man in line could see that the king was exactly as tall as a king should be, no more, no less. Gregor Clegane rode to the foot of the platform and put a hand on his thigh, which in other men might have been respect, and in him was the flinch the body makes when it thinks a blow is coming and has decided to accept it. He opened his mouth. Robert lifted his hand. "No," the king said. "We will not do this with words at the gate. You will come in chains and sit in a chair in a room that stinks of ink. You will speak there. If you are found lying, I will pull your tongue out through your broken teeth and use it to tie your hands. If you are found truthful, I will decide whether truth helps you. Until then, you will be straw and we will be the men who are careful with it." The mountain's eyes flashed once, quickly, like a fish near the surface, then were dull again. He dismounted with the deliberation of a man deciding not to show what decisions cost him. Bywater's men took him as if he were just one of many things they handled, not the largest. He allowed himself the dignity of not struggling. Jaime had watched all this with a face that had learned to be mistaken for idle amusement. He inclined his head to Robert and to Ned and to Bywater, all with the same exact degree, as if measuring blades. Then he turned his horse's head, and Robert said, "Stay." Jaime did not. "I follow my father," he said. "When he chooses to come into your hall, I will choose to stand where his shadow falls. Until then, I will ride." He smiled then in a way that was not entirely defensive. "I would tell you to come drink with me and make a lie of everything, but you no longer drink as much as you used to, and I no longer lie with the same ease. We are getting old." "You are young," Robert said. "Your father will make you older." He let the man go because he had chosen where to draw lines this month, and that one was not one of them. In Maegor's holdfast, news arrived in a way that was not yet rumor and not yet law. Cersei listened with a smile that looked like a coin turned over to test its sound. She called for Arya Stark to come say her farewells before Ned rode out again. She thought the girl would be all elbows and defiance, and would feed her a pleasure she had promised herself in quiet. Arya came like a wind with a sword of wood tucked into her belt. She bowed with that careless southern sloppiness she was learning to make a virtue of, and looked Cersei frankly in the face with those Tully eyes that had not learned to lower themselves without thinking it a sin. "You will say farewell to your father," Cersei said sweetly. "The city is dangerous for girls who do not know how to behave." "It is dangerous for boys who do," Arya said, and looked at Lancel carrying wine and made him red with a glance, because boys like Lancel live like a dropped apple, always about to bruise. "Syrio says the city is dangerous for men who think it is theirs and for men who think it is not. It is safest for cats." "Then go be a cat," Cersei said softly. "Do not come scratching at my door when a dog chases you." Arya smiled very briefly, which made her look like Robert when he was 12 and had not yet learned to use his fist instead of his hunger to solve every problem. "I have a wolf," she said, and left. And Cersei had the acid pleasure of hating a child for being insolent and knowing that she hated because of a man. Ned came to say goodbye to Sansa and found her with Myrcella sewing wrong on purpose and laughing about it. He looked at his daughter and saw more of his own fear than of his own face there, and his shoulders made that tiny movement they made when snow fell off them at last after a long march. "I will go fight a man who thinks breaking is the same thing as winning," he said to her. "I will come back. If I do not, you will look after your sister. You will look after other people's sisters as well. It is work men forget exists." "I will be brave," Sansa said. She meant, "I will sit still and do the work of the day with my hands." He heard it as courage because it was. He kissed her hair and did not try to keep his eyes from closing. On Dragonstone, Melisandre of Ashai lit no sword. She lit no obvious anything. She spread a cloth on a stone and set upon it 3 little things: a coal in a bronze cup, a draught of salty water in a bowl cut from a giant clam, and a sprig of something that had been green last week. She watched the coal refuse to die under breath she did not draw. She watched the water make a thin skin and tremble when the wind spoke. She watched the sprig and thought of a branch she would one day see burn without going black and would understand something she had missed all her life. She smiled into the gloom and said to no one, "He holds a door and will for a time. That is interesting. The cold waits. It will not knock. It will walk through if he stops holding." She bent and breathed a name she had learned long ago and had practiced on other men whose hands had been fat and whose laughter had hidden everything they considered clear. The name turned over like a fish under ice and did not rise. She was not displeased. She had never liked men who made things easy. In Winterfell, Robb Stark read his father's letter twice, and then a third time with Maester Luwin's finger moving under the words to show where what was not said was hidden. The great Jon shouted that it was time and past time. Roose Bolton suggested speaking quietly and then opening 12 throats in secret, which to his credit he did not pretend was noble. The Glover men looked to Robb's hands and saw if they shook. They did not. He wrote back not like a lordling hungry to be told he was a lord, but like a boy who had been given a hammer and told to fix a fence and wanted to do it right. He said, "I will keep men ready without making a song of it. I will keep the phrase wary because I do not like the look of their bridge even when it is in my favor. I will listen to men I do not like if they tell me things I do not want to hear. I will not come south unless you tell me to. Tell me to." Catelyn Tully of House Stark was at Riverrun when his letter reached her with her father's breath thin as a veil and her brother's pride too bright for how slowly his fire burned. She listened to Edmure boast of what he would do when he had a horse under him for more than a day and a father who had been set in a chair to watch him for less than a lifetime. She kissed Hoster's hand and told him that his grandson had written brave and plain and that he, Hoster, had been right to teach her to look at a man's bread before his blade. She went to the little balcony where she had once watched the river and thought of how she had been given to a man and had learned to love him and had been given children and had learned to love each twice as much as she had first thought she could. She did not think of Tyrion Lannister because thinking of him brought two paths to her mind, and she did not want to walk either just then. At the wall, ravens made their little night language among themselves and men stamped breath into the cold that had begun to taste like ass. Tory. Benjen Stark did not come back. The old bear sat and let Jon Snow bring him meat and heavy bread. And he did not speak of kings because the only king he was prepared to bow his head to was Winter. Below, in a yard where boys learned to be men and some men learned to be boys again too late, a red-haired smith worked with more anger than iron and Jon watched and tried to learn this other sort of fire. Summer held and was stubborn and then began to let her edges fray. Robert felt something he had not felt in years, a slow grace to his days, the way men work when they have chosen a hard task and are pleased with themselves for not putting it off. He ate less and remembered more. He sat with Gendry in a quiet room one evening and watched the boy look at the king the way a boy looks at a man he wants to be and does not want to be both, which is the only honest way to look if you mean to survive long enough to learn who you are. Gendry's hair was black as a promise kept. His eyes were grave and his fingers had already taken on that clean, scratch-scarred look of a smith's. Bywater had found him in a shed where a man had put him when the boy proved inconvenient, and had brought him without noise. "You know me," Robert said, when he had let the boy stand in his presence long enough to get used to not drowning. "You're the king," Gendry said. "I am," Robert agreed. "Once, I was a boy who made a hammer mean more than it had any right to. Are you a good smith?" "I will be," Gendry said, and the simple arrogance of it warmed Robert better than wine. "I make things the way men ask and sometimes the way I think they meant to ask." "Good," Robert said. "Tobo says you can make a copper look like bronze. One day you will make bronze that makes men forget about gold." He let the boy go with a purse that did not feel like charity because he had not filled it himself. He had made Littlefinger do it and taken a private pleasure from how it had stung. He went to sleep that night with the particular fatigue of a man whose life had been full of noise and who had managed a day with less of it. He dreamed of the trident because he always did when he was honest with himself. He woke with the taste of river silt in his mouth and sadness that did not demand to be turned into anger. In the morning, a new letter came with a neat hand that did not apologize for its clarity. It was from Lisa in the Eyrie. It said much about the safety of her child and little about the safety of the realm. It said a line that clenched his teeth. I released the dwarf because I could not bear to be told 3 times in 1 week that law is a chain around men who do not deserve it. He read it twice and then handed it to Ned with an expression that made words unnecessary. Ned gave it back without comment. They both had women in their lives they had not chosen and had learned to take the good with the damage. Tyrion Lannister stood in a window later and watched the afternoon light turn the city's bad parts beautiful and the beautiful parts honest. Bronn whistled, tuneless and satisfied as a cat. The mountain men had stolen something and were comparing whose theft had been more compelling. Tyrion laughed to himself. "I have been given a game," he said half aloud. "I will play it better than anyone wants." "Do I need to cut somebody?" Bronn asked cheerfully. "Not till supper," Tyrion said. "We're invited to a very dull meal, and I like to bring entertainment." At that very dull meal, Robert leaned over a map and moved a small stone boat along it with his thumb. "Tywin will press," he said to the room at large. "He cannot not. It is not just pride. It is the way the world feels to him. We will make him spend himself against men who hate him for the right reasons, not just for the ones that make songs. We will keep the riverlands from burning more than their own hearths need. We will put the mountain in a chair and call witnesses and let him speak and find if there is a road from law to justice that is not too muddy to travel. And if there is not," Barristan asked, because he had learned over years how to ask questions that seem severe but are just care-cradling duty. "Then I will use a hammer," Robert said, easy and grim as bread. "I remember how." The trial did not resemble the plays men put on. It was long and smelled of men who had eaten onion and ink in equal measures. It had too many names, too many tears from those whose voices cracked at the sight of a man with a neck as wide as a lesser man's thigh. It had men who lied so smoothly that lying was a kind of poetry, and men who told the truth badly. Robert sat and Ned stood, and Bywater kept the room from thinking it was a battlefield where anything might be tried. Varys listened with the patience of a man who has learned to make an art of breathing. Littlefinger watched like a man trying to count cards in a game no one else knew had cards. Once, Tyrion laughed aloud at a crafty answer and did not apologize because he had earned the right always to be the man who laughs when other men do not. Gregor Clegane spoke rarely and without interest. When he did, he said things that made even men who had done cruelty shift. I did not notice his name. He made a sound that was loud enough to be a dog's. I cut him because if you do not cut a thing, sometimes it grows. He said, "Fire is a better tool than men give it credit for." He said, "I was told to make men afraid." He did not say by whom. He did not need to. The room knew whose coin he had smelled like. In the end, Robert stood and gave up any hope of pleasing both law and mercy. "I cannot prove everything I know," he said, and it was as brutal and honest a sentence as he had ever spoken. "I can prove enough. I am king. This man will go to the wall. If the wall decides he is more danger than it can use, it will send back his head. If he breaks his journey and runs, I will send men to hunt him who do not mind blood on their hands so long as it is the right blood. I cannot make a pretty justice out of this. I can make a useful one." Gregor blinked once at the word wall and showed no other interest. Men muttered. Some were disappointed that there would be no spectacular death in a square. Some were relieved that the spectacle would be delayed and set in a place where men like them did not have to watch. Ned's mouth eased half a line, and he met Robert's eyes and gave a small, austere nod that said, "It will do." When night came, the city felt a little like a man who has learned he does not have to stand watch that night and will sleep hard because tomorrow he must again. Robert drank once and not more, and ate meat that had been cooked too long and did not complain. He dreamed of hammers that he could not lift, then woke and found that he could. Winter did not come, not yet, but long fingers of cool began to touch the insides of men's arms when they reached into barrels at dawn. Men on walls pulled their cloaks closer and were not mocked for it. The river lost a little of its laziness and gained some purpose. Letters came and went like fish under the surface. You knew they were there by the ripples they left. Robb Stark's answered, "Hold." Caitlyn's, "I am proud of a thing I did not want and did." Edmure's, "I can hold a ford." Lisa's, "I can hide forever." Tywin's, "I am polite until I am not." Salador Sans. I will be paid before I sing. Stannis's. I will obey until obedience becomes cowardice. I will tell you when that happens. Renly's. I will be loved until love makes men stupid. I will tell them stories that make their stupidity useful. Davos. I will stand where tide says stand. On the second morning after the mountain was set to be sent north, someone put a little drawing up on a tavern wall between the street of Smiths and the fish market. It showed a man with a hammer holding a door while a shadow with a crown tried to slip through and found an old, ugly hand in its way. Someone else drew a pig to mock the king with the old story. A boy added a loaf, very well done indeed. A watchman walked past and did not scrape it off because it pleased him. Later he would tell his granddaughter that he had let art stand and she would make a face because granddaughters are built for such things. On a day when the sky was the precise blue of a blade you had just honed, a raven came from the far north, not from Maester Aemon but from a ranger whose hand had been made clumsy by cold. Said little. Said enough, cold things walk. Robert read it and felt his life rearrange itself again, the way stones move when root grows under them. He summoned men and held the dark paper up where they could see it and said, "The wall speaks. We will listen." Stannis lifted his head and looked at the east and then north with equal distaste. Renly stopped smiling for a heartbeat and then began again because smiling is not lying when it is used to keep men breathing. Ned's mouth tightened because he already knew, because the Stark in him had always known that summer was a debt. The hall was quieter for a longer moment than any sermon had made it. "We will strengthen the garrisons along the King's Road north," Robert said. "We will send skilled men, not dregs. We will send coin that is not clipped. We will send grain that has not been stored in damp and called rich. We will send a letter to the watch telling them we remember what they are. And we will continue to break bread and heads in this city, so that when the cold comes south it finds men who do not trip over their own feet." Bells rang for a wedding in the city that afternoon because someone had found a loaf, and someone else had found a woman brave enough to say yes in winter, and they had not wished to wait. Robert walked past them and took an apple from a boy who had too many and bit into it and tasted the clean sting that comes when fruit surprises you by being exactly itself. The boy beamed and shouted his name, which Robert forgot and would remember later at night when he woke and there was nothing to fill the room but his thoughts. In the dusk, he stood at the parapet again and felt the sea's long muscle under the wind. He had never loved the sea. It made him feel teased. He loved it a little now because it felt like a thing you could not lie to. He had told a truth in his hall and men had not died for it. Not immediately. He had pointed a giant toward a wall and told himself that was justice. It would be, if the wall took what the city could not digest. He had kept his brothers breathing and learned to let Renly sing lodged words to tired men and to let Stannis write lines straighter than any man's patience deserves. He thought of all that and of a girl across water with eggs that no one would take seriously until they hatched, and of a boy in the north with a wolf who would learn sorrow early and carry it like a blade that could be hidden in a sleeve, and of a girl in a holdfast whose mother would teach her to make her face as smooth as milk so that men would forget it could curdle. He thought of Tywin Lannister sitting with his back straight in a chair that had never been sat crooked in, considering whether to move east like a storm or hold still like a drought. He thought of the wall and the way old men always sound when they are forced to speak loudly over wind. Careful, respectful, and afraid, though they will not use the word. He said a thing to himself that he had not said when he was young. "I will not live forever." He smiled at the honesty and set his hands on stone. He did not ask the gods to make him live long. He asked them to make him live correctly while he did. He felt foolish for asking and then less foolish and then simply tired. He went to his bed and lay down without drink because the day itself had been a draught deep enough to drown a man who did not know how to swim. When the morning came, he rose to begin again. The realm does not stop to clap. It does not care if you are heroic. It notices when you feed it and when you slap it and when you leave doors open and when you hold them shut. He held the door. He broke bread. He sent men north and west and east. He spoke the law and did not pretend it was poetry. He told his brothers when to sing and when to count, and he let them do each in their way. He did not drink when it would blur the next word he needed to say. He did not lift his hammer when a word would do. He lifted it when a word would not. He did not put off the work because it would be there later. He did it because he was here now. That was the thing the city felt through its boots and into its bones. That a man had remembered he was here now. It made the days better. It made the nights quieter. It made enemies more careful and friends more honest. It did not change the winter that would come. It did not make shadows cease to want to move through narrow spaces. It did not make lions find the taste of their own pride unpleasant. But it made the space in which men lived cleaner, and for a time that was everything, and in that time a king stood where he should, and two brothers who should never have been kings in song learned to be princes in practice, and a girl with a wooden sword learned to stand in the door to a room and measure it with her feet, and a woman behind a wall of stone counted days like coins and planned to spend them all at once. And somewhere beyond sight, in the crisp hours just before dawn, a raven sat on a post outside a cottage and looked out over a field that had been harvested clean and a road that ran straight to a city where men had started, once more, to speak truth aloud without making a show of it, and if the raven had been a man it would have smiled. It croaked once instead and shook out its wings and flew north, where truth had been waiting a long time and would have to be told again in harsher words. Who watched candles and bigger boys who watched loaves and two old men whose hands had trembled when they took their coin because they had given up calling themselves proud. A choice was made quickly. It pleased no one, which is to say it offended everyone evenly. The new high septon had a face like a baked apple and a cough he claimed to be godly and a mind that counted. He came to the Red Keep and bowed and did not ask whether he could enter the holdfast to bless the queen. If God wishes to bless her, he said blandly. He knows the way. Cersei, hearing of the choice, laughed low. So, she said to Myrcella, a man with manners. We shall see what he wishes to buy with them. That night, a different door opened that was not a gate. It was a window barely wide enough for a child to slip through, 3 floors up from the holdfast's internal yard, where a drain's gullet sat black and sincere in the corner of a wall. 2 men had measured the stone during the day and seen a path, narrow but real, from that window to a roofline 2 leaps away and a rope hidden in a chimney and down to a place where a horse would be waiting, quieted with a hood over his eyes and a sweet apple in his mouth. They had told themselves stories of old mercies and new pay and been satisfied. When the hour came, they lifted Tommen from his bed. He woke, startled, then relaxed when he saw Sandor in the doorway. We're going to play a game, one of the men whispered, as if the boy did not still live in a world where men played games with him that had no rules and he did not yet know he could refuse. We're going to see if you can climb like a cat. Cats don't have swords, Sandor said from the door, and stepped inside. He had a way of moving when the moment came that was surprisingly quiet, nothing like his big, deliberate gait when he walked the yard. He did not shout. He did not draw first. He did not say anything foolish like drop the boy. He crossed the room in 3 exact steps and took the rope from the man's hand and then his wrist with his other hand and turned, and the man went over the bed and thumped, and the other man lunged toward the window and found Barristan Selmy's white shadow on the sill like a piece of moonlight that had decided to be steel. My mother? Tommen began, on the edge of tears, and Sandor said, Your mother will be angry when she finds I have scuffed my boot on her floor, and that is all. Go to bed. Tommen, who would have obeyed any man who spoke in that tone in that moment, crawled back under his coverlet and held the kitten to his chest and put his face in its fur. The men were taken away. Later, one would be hung in a neat place where the city could see and pretend it did not. One would go to the wall with Slint because Stannis had not yet decided if it was better for the law to be feared or for men to be corrected where they could be corrected. Cersei did not thank Sandor. She looked at his boots and said, Clean your soles before you walk next in my chambers. And Sandor bowed in a way that mocked bowing without showing his teeth. Ned stood that morning with Stannis at the window where the air from the bay came in with a tentative coolness and spoke of mercy and judgment and the way a city's patience has ribs. You will break it if you do not let it breathe, Ned said. It is like a man's chest. You can bind it to force it still for an hour. You cannot keep it binded and expect it to live. Stannis's mouth moved in that particular way it had when the truth had been spoken and annoyed him by being obvious. I will not let the Red Woman set a fire in the square, he said abruptly, as if the announcement had been torn out of him. She wants it. She thinks to make my god king by burning the other gods' dresses. Let her burn her own. Thank you, Ned said. It was not a word he had said to the man often. He meant it. He would have meant it if he had despised Stannis. It is something to watch a man choose against his appetite when the law and the public good require it. She says we must make a new day, Stannis said more quietly. I tell her that the sun rises without her. She says the sun is her god. I say the sun has not read the book. He looked sidelong at Ned. Do you think me ridiculous? Do you think me fearful of old women's smoke? I think you want the law to stand, Ned said. That is enough to make a man ridiculous to half the world. Stannis's mouth twitched once. And wrong to the other half, he said. Very well. I will be ridiculous and wrong. We will hold our line. They held it for 16 days. In that time Davos brought ships deeper into the bay with their bellies low. Littlefinger found coins in places he had forgotten he had left coins and made them walk to the watch. Varys unrolled and rolled a map of the Red Keep's underpassage so often that the parchment's corners began to fray. He watched the fraying the way a gardener watches a leaf he means to prune. Pycelle dosed himself against gout and praised the queen's patience to the ceiling of his chambers while sending to the rock for a chest of dried plums that would be certain to arrive in time to remind Cersei that not all gifts are useful. Barristan rode out and back thrice with letters and returned each time with fewer words than he had taken and more meaning. Stannis held court and measured his own temper against those who tried to exploit it and did so while counting loaves, which is a feat Ned walked and wrote and spoke and kept his daughters in a room full of air and would not let himself count the days in any way but as work done. On the 17th day, a rumor slipped into the city's ear that the Tyrells had chosen a king. It was a soft rumor, whispered first among men who liked to pretend they owned gardens because they had coins to buy a basket of pears, and it was all the more dangerous for its softness. The name it carried was Renly. It said that flowers were better than law, that ease was better than justice, that a smiling face was better than a stern one when you woke and looked toward the throne. It said that Mace Tyrell had a daughter and a plan and a power men had longed to be asked to touch. It said many things and some of them were true and some of them were only pretty. Ned read a letter from Bitterbridge and felt a weariness in his muscles that had nothing to do with the heat. He could see Renly in the words, grace and a theatrical humility and the offer of bread under a green banner that would go where Stannis' spare standards would not be invited. He will call banners. He will call the reach. He will put a crown on his own head and say that he has done it for the good of the realm and men will love him for saying the thing they were going to do anyway, he said to Stannis. They will say the law is cruel. They will say you are cruel. They will say that a smiling lie is better than a hard truth. I am not cruel, Stannis said. The words had the force of a man telling a doctor that his condition was not his fault and demanding to be cured anyway. His eyes went flat. And I will not let a boy take what is mine because men do not like my face. He turned away and set his hand on the sill. We hold the queen. We hold the children. We hold the city. We have the law. Let him bring flowers. He will bring bread, Davos said gently from the doorway. He had come up quiet as was his habit. And men like bread. Then bring me more bread, Stannis snapped without turning. Davos took it without offense. I will bring you bread. He could bring bread. He could not bring men who love their king against their taste. That is a different trade. That afternoon the city saw something it had not seen in days. A procession not of priests or guards or men carrying sacks but of women with baskets of flowers. They came from the Street of Sisters and the orchards beyond the walls, from plots of earth stolen behind towers where no one saw a gardener until the blossom's colors gave her away. They came with roses and orange blossom and myrtle. They came with the smells that had drifted into the godswood and made Ned feel like a man standing in a baker's warm yard. They stopped in the square before the great September and sang a song about summer and about a hand that had guided a child in a garden where the fruit hung heavy and the child was not tempted to steal. The song was harmless. That made it more dangerous. Men listened and smiled and put their hands upon their wives' backs and thought perhaps there could be a gentler king. Flowers make men stupid, Sandor said, watching from a window slit with a face that did not care whether that was an offense. And spears make them honest again. Spears make them dead, Ned said. He did not forbid the women, and he did not smile. He let the song run its course and end, and ordered bread to be brought to the square while the scent of flowers still lay upon it. Eat, he told the women personally, because a man cannot only speak from steps and windows and expect to be believed when he says he knows what hunger feels like. Sing tomorrow if you must. Eat now. On the 19th night, Varys came to Ned at an hour when honest men ought to have found their beds and set a folded square upon the table between them. He did not open it. His hands rested upon it the way a man rests his hands upon a bird he has caught and means to let fly if permitted. My little birds tell me, he said, that Lord Tywin has given a letter to a knight to carry to Sir Adam Marbrand. The letter says that if you will not break, he will starve you. He will not come to the city. He will burn the riverlands and make you come out, and then he will burn your friends when you do. It also says, Varys breathed in as if reluctant to aspirate the next word, that your wife is at Riverrun. He will take her if he can. He will take her to the rock and keep her in a tower without windows, and you will be a king's hand without a hand. He does not like living men to hold what is his. He likes them to be stone. Ned's hand went to the letter without his telling it to. He kept it there for a count of 5. He will not take her, he said. He is not that good. Few are, Varys agreed. But he is better than most at what he does, and what he does is punish. He drives a knife into a man's bread and looks him in the eye as he eats his supper at another table. He tapped the folded square. This is for you. It came over a road I do not wish to describe. Ned opened it. Catelyn's hand. The letters leant into one another like people caught in a storm. Brynden had written some lines below, blunt and lined like a jaw. Edmure was healing, sullen. The Fords watched by men who wanted to prove themselves. Walder Frey was sitting and counting, and Catelyn had sat and watched him count and had wanted to throw the stones of his bridge down into the water to see if the old man could count then. I am well, she had written. I think often of Winterfell and of your face when you are determined. Your daughters are honest girls. Be patient with them, and be less patient with men who smile and lie. She had drawn a little mark beside the last line that he knew meant she had been angry when she wrote it and had made herself unangry. Robb grows taller, she added in a smaller hand. He stands like you and smiles like me when he remembers. He does not remember to smile often these days. Tell him to remember when you write to him, or he will forget altogether. I will, Ned said to the paper. He folded the letter and put it in a place where he would not be tempted to touch it too often. On the 20th morning, a boy with a ribbon pinned to his cap to show he had a right to stand on a certain step and not to be jostled fell and broke his arm in the square. Sandor Clegane, who hated the city's press, went through it as if it were wheat and picked the boy up without tender words and held him as if he were a dog he did not want to drop. He took him to a maester without looking at the women who watched him with the sudden soft eyes women get when they see anything male with gentleness in it. He came back and scowled when a fishwife thanked him. He stank, he told Ned later. But he did not lie about the pain. Few do, Ned said, until it goes. On the 21st day, Renly's green reached Highgarden and bloomed. A letter arrived 2 days later, and while the hand was Renly's, the smell upon the paper was rose oil. It said nothing directly, promised everything indirectly. It spoke of feasts that do not end and of a king who knows that men are tired of being told what is right and would like to be told what is pleasant. Stannis read it with his mouth hard and set it down as if it had been a piece of spoiled meat. He will find that men's appetites will run before his horse, he said. Let them. They will choke on them. Some will, Ned said. Enough, Stannis said. That afternoon the Queen sent for Ned. It was a simple message. The Queen would see the Lord Hand. It was delivered by a girl with hair the color of straw who had been prettified by a ribbon and whose shoes were too new. Ned went. He took Tomard because Tomard was a wall when he stood in a doorway and a hand that did not shake when it needed to move a man from a room. The guard at the holdfast's inner door looked to him and did not need to ask whether to open. He did. Ned smelled lemon and rose and steel. He entered. Cersei stood with a goblet in her hand that had a lion's face worked into it. She looked at the goblet as if she disliked its taste and drank anyway. Myrcella sat with a skein of thread tangled in her lap and a determined look on her face that did not belong to her mother. Tommen scratched a cat and whispered to it as if it were a knight he had to persuade to ride. Joffrey leaned against the mantel and wore his sulk like a badge. "You have kept your promise," Cersei said. "Thus far," Ned said. "Thus far," she echoed. She held the goblet up, studied the wine, let it lower. "I have kept mine. I have not set your city on fire. I have not had your daughters dragged into the square." She smiled. "I have not even tried as many doors as I could have tried." "You have tried enough," Ned said. "I will try more," she said conversationally. "This is not a threat. This is a truth. A woman in a cage tests its bars every day until she finds one warmer than the others." She glanced past him at Tommen and then back, dismissing the man with a contempt that was not the man's fault. "Lord Stark," she said, and there was something unexpected in her voice then. Not softness, nothing so cheap, but a quality that might have been pity turned back upon itself because pity had no place to go. "When this ends, and it will end, men like you cannot make the world bear your weight indefinitely. Either it breaks or you do. It is not a condemnation. It is a fact. When it ends, keep the girl who writes letters safe." She tilted her head. "She will forgive too easily. That is not a boon in this city." Ned's throat worked. He had not meant to let it. "I will keep both my girls," he said. "I hope so," Cersei said, "because I will keep mine." She drank this time. She made a face and then smiled. "Do you know what I miss?" she asked suddenly, turning the goblet's lip with her thumb. "Banquets where men make fools of themselves in pretty ways. I would like to watch that again. This is an ugly kind of game." "It is a necessary kind," Ned said. "Of course," she agreed. "So is slaughtering pigs. And I like bacon." She set the goblet down. "Come then, wolf. Let us wait and see whether my father bleeds you or whether your law cuts him." She showed her teeth. "Or whether the flowers choke you both." When Ned left the holdfast, the air in the yard seemed clean, which was a trick of his lungs and not of the day. He stood a moment and let the wind touch his face. The bridge's stones had warmed underfoot. Kedge saluted him with a hand to his helm that was not quite crisp, because Kedge had never learned crispness and it was too late to hammer it into him. In the Tower of the Hand, when the door closed behind him, he found Arya perched on a stool with her legs drawn up and her chin on her knee, and a look that said she had been trying not to sleep and had failed. She raised her head. "Father," she said, with the roughness of a girl who has shouted names into the air where they cannot be caught. "Syrio says the city is a dance. Sansa says the city is a story. What do you say it is?" Ned said. The chair accepted him the way it always did, with a little groan of wood. He thought of what he wanted to say and what would be true and useful. "It is a field," he said finally. "There is harvest in it and vermin. There is rain you cannot call and sun you cannot command. There are men who will help you reap because they want bread, and men who will steal your sheaves and call it hunger. You walk it, and you put your foot down where the ground is firm." Arya nodded solemnly as if she had been given a sword and told to hold it properly. "I like the field better than the story," she said. "You cannot stab a story. You can stab a dance," he said, and she grinned suddenly, a flash of the child he knew. He sent her to bed with Sirio's eyes following her and measuring how she took the corner and where she put her foot when the floor changed. He sat longer. He wrote a letter to Robb and said the things Catelyn had asked him to say, and said also the things he would have said if she had not asked. That a man must be ready to give up his name if the law requires it, and that he must also be ready to take it back when the law is misused. That the Riverlands were not a game, and neither was the North. That a lord is lord only because other men trust him not to throw their lives into a river without a bridge on the other side. He wrote to Maester Luwin and asked him to keep a close eye on the boys' lessons and on the kennels. He wrote to Howland Reed and said little in many words and everything in none. He sealed the letters. He looked at the seal after each, as if it had something to tell him. It did not. It was wax and wolf. On the 23rd day, men in the city learned to say King Stannis without looking to see how others said it, and that was more than any crown does in its first month most years. On the 24th, Davos returned with a Reachman's ship taken as prize from men who had thought to make a quick coin in a city at war with itself. He brought a sailor who had a song about Renly that would have made a better lady than a king blush and then ask for the next verse. He brought, too, a priest of Renly with eyes like dull embers and a devotion that made men superstitious whether or not they had ever heard the word superstition. Stannis sent the man to a quiet chamber with an order that he was not to step across the sept's doors. "My God does not need to stamp upon a mother's floor," he said. "He can find me in a small room." Melisandre came 3 days later. She came with the grace of smoke and the confidence of fire. She walked through the red keep with her scarlet like spilled wine and made men's eyes slide, not because of shame, because they had never seen anyone so certain of herself who did not carry a sword. She went to Stannis and bowed and said the names she had been saying since Dragonstone. Azor Ahai and light and darkness and the night being dark and full of terrors. Stannis listened with the patience of a man who knows that a tool useful in storm must be kept dull in fair weather. "You will not light a fire in my square," he said again. "You will not take a hammer to the gods that keep these people's feet under them. You will pray. I will judge." Melisandre inclined.